Tonight, we're going deep into 28 deep lore facts about the world of House of the Dragon and the broader history of Westeros. This is a topic with a lot to uncover, but I'll keep my narration calm so you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Close your eyes and imagine a horizon that never truly goes dark. Imagine a peninsula where the sky is permanently bruised with shades of deep violet and angry orange, illuminated by the constant, rhythmic pulsing of 14 massive volcanoes. This was the 14 Fires, the ancestral heart of the Valyrian freehold. It was a place where the earth itself seemed to be in a state of perpetual labor, birthing heat, obsidian, and the most terrifying creatures to ever grace the skies. For thousands of years, the Dragon Lords of Valyria sat atop the world, their power absolute, their magic unrivaled, and their bloodlines kept pure through traditions that the rest of the world viewed with a mixture of awe and horror. They were a people who believed they were closer to gods than to men, and for a long time, the world had no reason to disagree. But history is a cycle of rising and falling, and even the most golden age must eventually give way to the dark. We often look at the world of Game of Thrones as a place of grit and survival, a world where the magic has mostly faded into whispers and old wives' tales. But the story of House of the Dragon takes us back to a time when that magic was still a living, breathing, roaring reality. It takes us back to the height of the Targaryen dynasty, a century into their reign over the Seven Kingdoms, when the skies were thick with wings and the Iron Throne was still a jagged, terrifying monument to a conquest that changed the world forever. The tragedy of the Targaryens is not just that they lost their power, but how they lost it. It wasn't an external enemy that brought them low. It wasn't a foreign invasion or a natural disaster. It was the friction of their own internal ambitions. It was the weight of a crown that was never meant to be shared. When we look at the Dance of the Dragons, we aren't just looking at a civil war. We are looking at the slow-motion collapse of a family that held the keys to the world. We are looking at the moment the dragons began to die out, and with them, the last vestiges of the old Valyrian glory. To truly understand the stakes of this era, we have to look back even further than the reign of King Viserys I. We have to look at the prophecy of a young girl named Daenys the Dreamer, whose visions of fire and shadow saved her family from a cataclysm that erased an entire civilization from the map. We have to consider the isolation of Dragonstone, that lonely, salt-stained outpost in the narrow sea, where the Targaryens waited for over a century, watching the horizon, knowing that they were the last of their kind. We have to think about Aegon the Conqueror, a man who looked at a fractured continent and decided to forge it into a single entity, not out of simple greed, but out of a conviction that only a united Westeros could survive the terrors that the future might hold. The world of House of the Dragon is a world of immense beauty and immense cruelty. It is a world where the architecture is grander, the wealth is more concentrated, and the dragons are more numerous than anything we saw in the later years of the Seven Kingdoms. But beneath the surface of this prosperity, there are cracks forming. There is the tension of succession, the bitterness of overlooked heirs, and the complex web of alliances that turn brothers against sisters and dragons against dragons. The Iron Throne itself serves as a perfect metaphor for this era. In the time of Daenerys Targaryen, the throne was a relatively contained seat of power. But in the era of the dance, it is a chaotic, sprawling mess of melted blades, a physical manifestation of the violence and the ego required to rule. It is a seat that demands blood from those who sit upon it, a constant reminder that power is never comfortable and never truly secure. As we dive into these 28 facts, we are going to explore the layers of history that George R.R. Martin built into this legend. We will look at the real-world historical events that inspired the brutal political maneuvering of the Blacks and the Greens, from the chaotic years of the English Anarchy to the bloody betrayals of the Scottish Highlands. We will examine the production of the show itself, uncovering the physical toll it took on the actors to bring these dragon riders to life, and the creative decisions that went into differentiating this era from the one we already know. We will talk about the linguistic depth of High Valyrian, a language that feels like a relic from a lost world, and the way it connects the characters to their vanished homeland. We will look at the figures who stood in the shadows of the royal family, like the sea snake, Corlys Velaryon, whose house built its power on the waves rather than the skies, proving that even in a world of dragons, the sea still holds its own ancient authority. We will explore the psychological complexity of characters like Daemon Targaryen, a man who embodies both the best and the worst of his bloodline, the charisma, the cruelty, the loyalty, and the chaos. This is a journey through a world that is both familiar and alien. It is a deep dive into the myths that the people of Westeros tell themselves, and the hard truths that lie beneath those myths. It is a story about the end of an era, the death of magic, and the high cost of a crown made of swords. Whether you are a scholar of the Citadel or a casual traveler in the Seven Kingdoms, there is always more to learn about the House of the Dragon. There are always more secrets hidden in the smoke of the 14 fires, and more warnings etched into the stones of Dragonstone. So, as we prepare to step back 200 years before the fall of the Mad King, before the birth of the Mother of Dragons, and before the long winter that threatened to consume everything, let yourself be carried away by the history of a family that flew too close to the sun. We are going to look at the numbers, the dates, the names, and the legends. We are going to see how a single dream led to a conquest, and how a single disagreement led to a dance that scorched the earth. From the makeup chairs where actors transformed into silver-haired royalty, to the mechanical rigs that simulated the flight of gods, we are going to uncover every detail of this magnificent, tragic tapestry. The story of the Targaryens is a story of fire and blood, but it is also a story of human frailty. It is about the choices we make when we have too much power, and the things we lose when we forget who we are. It is a history written in Dragonflame, and tonight we are going to read it together, one fact at a time, until the last embers of the past have been revealed. The Valyrian Peninsula is best understood as a wound in the world that refused to heal. A vast sentinel of stone and fire, jutting into the summer sea, its spine was a chain of 14 volcanoes, known as the 14 Fires. These were not dormant gods sitting quietly beneath the earth. They were active, breathing, belching sulfur and ash into a sky of perpetual volcanic twilight. The very ground of the peninsula was a slow forge, a constant shattering and remaking of the crust over millennia. This is where the story of the Dragon Lords truly begins, not in a palace of marble, but in the molten heart of a geological hellscape that paradoxically granted the Valyrians the richest soil in the known world, and, more importantly, the deadliest weapons. How do you actually discover a dragon? The Valyrians did not find eggs glistening in a cave, or steal them from the far corners of the earth. The dragons were native to the 14 Fires. The volcanoes themselves served as massive, natural incubators. The vents pumped out the impossible heat required for a dragon egg to quicken, the specific volcanic chemistry, mating with ancient magic to birth the first wyrms. The earliest Valyrian records speak of their ancestors, a humble people of shepherds and miners, finding the first dragons nesting deep within the volcanic flues. These were not the docile mounts of a later age. They were spirits of living stone and fire, born from the magma itself. The discovery was less a taming and more a negotiation, a pact struck with the fury of the earth. The Valyrians learned to bind the beasts of the volcano to their will, and in doing so, they bound themselves to the very precise, volatile nature of their home. The string of fire was the dragon's cradle and its cage, and that duality deeply shaped everything that followed. To be a dragon lord was to be a child of the volcano. The culture of the Valyrian freehold was obsessed with fire, not as a simple household element, but as a divine, shaping force. The architecture of Valyria reflected the flows of magma, buildings of fused black stone that looked frozen in the middle of an eruption. Their magic, the blood magic, the binding spells, the control of the dragons, was intimately tied to the heat radiating from the 14 peaks. Valyrian steel, that great equalizer, could only have been forged in such a place, where the fire burned hot enough to fold spells into the very molecular structure of the metal. The geography of the peninsula, divided by lava flows and ash fields, created a caste system. The Dragon Lords lived closest to the fires, literally and figuratively, while their vast slave populations toiled in the fields below. The constant geological threat did not produce philosophers or poets, it produced conquerors. You didn't survive the fury of the earth by being merciful or kind. You survived by being fireproof, by being ruthless, by dominating absolutely. The environment was a pressure cooker of ambition, magic, and barely contained violence, perfectly mirrored by the geology trembling beneath their marble palaces. But a pressure cooker cannot hold forever. The same fires that gave the Valyrians life carried the seeds of their destruction. The peninsula was geologically unsound. The 14 fires were not independent mountains. They were a single, vast network of magma chambers, a web of fire stretching beneath the entire landmass. The constant use of fire magic, the excavation of deep mines for precious ores, the sheer weight of the civilization, it all put an unimaginable strain on the fault lines. The Valyrian freehold, in its absolute arrogance, believed it had tamed the earth itself. But you cannot truly tame a volcano. You can only ride it until it bucks you. The seismic activity was increasing. The fires were rumbling more frequently. The signs were there for those who cared to look, but the Dragon Lords were too consumed with their endless games of power, their blood sacrifices, their petty wars of conquest across Essos. They ignored the groaning of the world around them. The eventual split of the peninsula was not just a random geological accident. It was a suicide engineered by an entire civilization that had lived too close to the flame for far too long. When the end finally came, it was not a whisper, it was a shout across dimensions. The 14 fires did not simply erupt, they detonated in a perfect, terrible chain reaction that shattered the entire landmass, shattering the very bedrock of magic in the world. The sky broke open, the sea turned to steam, and the heart of the most powerful empire the world had ever known was torn apart in a single night. But the most terrifying part of this story is not the lava or the ash, it is the eerie silence that preceded it, and the impossible aftermath that continues to haunt the waters of the smoking sea. How did Daenys the Dreamer see it coming centuries in advance? What terrible forces were truly unleashed when those 14 chambers gave way? That is the story of the Doom of Valyria, and it is a chapter that deserves its own deep exploration. The 14 fires gave Valyria everything it had, a landscape of living flame that breathed magic into the world and birthed creatures of pure, unmaker's fire. The Dragon Lords built their civilization upon the very mouths of the volcanoes, fusing stone and sorcery into a society so powerful it made the kingdoms of Westeros look like backwater villages. But the same forces that granted the Valyrian freehold its peerless strength carried within them an inevitable, ticking clock. The volcanoes did not simply sleep. They breathed with a deep, molten anger, and the Dragon Lords, in their bottomless arrogance, believed they had mastered that anger. They believed their sorcery held the very continent of their homeland together. They were catastrophically wrong. We call it the Doom, but that single word is far too small to hold the weight of what happened. The Doom of Valyria was not a single disaster. It was a symphony of annihilation. It began, according to the fragments of testimony that survived from the handful of distant witnesses, as a tremor, then another. The 14 fires did not erupt one after the other in some orderly sequence. They erupted as one, a seismic howl that split the entire Valyrian peninsula from the mainland of Essos, severing it completely. The fires that fed the dragon's creation turned upon their masters. The mountains of the peninsula, the volcanic heart of their entire civilization, exploded from within. The earth did not simply crack, it turned to glass. The seas began to boil, turning every harbor into a killing field of steam that cooked the ships at anchor. What we are describing is a catastrophic chain reaction of fire and earthquakes that ripped the very geography of the world apart. Poisonous gases swept across the cities in waves, killing entire populations where they stood before the lava even reached them. The skies rained ash and black stone for days. The smoke was so thick that the sun was blotted out over the entire eastern continent for months. A year, perhaps longer. The air burned, the water burned, the very ground beneath your feet would have been screaming with the shuddering force of the end of the world, and all of it was lost. The great roads of fused stone that could never be recreated. The towers adorned with statues of sphinxes and dragons sculpted by magic. The libraries containing knowledge that predated the first men. that predated the Dawn Age itself, knowledge of blood magic and metallurgy, and the raising of dragons that no human has ever understood since. All of it consumed. The Freehold was a civilization of such immense advancement that its lowliest citizens lived in a splendor that rivaled the kings of Westeros. Their engineers commanded spells that could reshape matter at a whisper. Their sorcerers could control the elements with their minds, but they could not control the heart of their own power when that heart decided to explode. It was the total annihilation of the world's most advanced civilization. Nothing like it exists today. Nothing has come close since. The ruins are so cursed, so twisted by lingering fire magic and death, that sailors refuse to sail within miles of the smoking sea that now covers the peninsula. They say the water burns green at night. They say the ghosts of the Dragon Lords still scream in the updrafts. Now, put this in the context of the stories you already know. The Doom of Valyria occurred exactly 400 years before the War of the Five Kings. 400 years before Eddard Stark lost his head, before the Red Wedding, before the Siege of King's Landing, 102 years before Aegon the Conqueror set sail from Dragonstone to unite Westeros. This single event acts as the great dividing line of all history in this world. Before the Doom, magic saturated the world, dragons ruled the skies by the thousands, and the Valyrian Freehold was the undisputed master of the known world, stretching its influence from the shores of Westeros to the far east of Ashai. After the Doom, the world was a ruin. Empires rose and fell in the sudden vacuum of power. The Century of Blood, one of the most brutal periods of conflict humanity ever endured, was the direct consequence of the Doom's collapse. The Dothraki emerged from the grasslands as a new power. The free cities developed their own distinct identities, no longer governed by the distant Dragon Lords. Every single significant political event that leads directly to the Iron Throne and the wars you love is a direct echo of that one night of catastrophe. This brings us to a mystery that has haunted the scholars of the Citadel for centuries. The riddle of the survivor. The Targaryens survived. They were not the most powerful house in Valyria. They were not the richest or the most numerous or the most politically dominant. By every contemporary account, House Targaryen was considered a minor Dragonlord family. Why them? Why were the Targaryens the only dragon riders to survive the Doom of Valyria? The simplest answer is geography. Dragonstone. By the time the 14 fires erupted into their chain reaction, Lord Rhaenyra Targaryen had already relocated his entire household to the grim volcanic island fortress in the Narrow Sea, a full 12 years before the cataclysm. The distance to Westeros, the isolation of the outpost, and the sheer luck of being an ocean away from the epicenter saved their lives. But luck feels insufficient when you look deeper. The Doom was not a random earthquake. It was a magical event. The earth swallowed Valyria, as if the land itself had been judged. Other Dragonlord families had holdings abroad. Other families had fleets and armies stationed in Lys, in Volantis, in Tyrosh. None of their dragons escaped. The dragons on Dragonstone lived. The dragons of the other 40 families died, even the ones who were not in the peninsula at the time. This suggests the Doom was a targeted sorceress execution. It destroyed the very magic that bound the dragons to their riders, or perhaps it destroyed the land itself so completely that any dragon tethered to the Valyrian bloodlines was consumed by the same convulsion, pulled down by a link in the chain that snapped. The Targaryens were not just lucky. They were the only ones who had listened to a whisper from beyond the veil of time. The only ones who had been given a warning that the paradise they lived in was about to become a literal hell. The flight to Dragonstone is a story of survival against impossible odds, but at its root, it is a story of foresight, a single voice crying out in the dark, begging to be heard. Lord Rhaenyra did not decide to uproot his entire family, abandon his lands, his titles, and his entire culture on a whim. He was convinced to do so by his daughter, a young woman who saw the Doom in her dreams with such terrifying, bone-deep clarity that she could describe the sky boiling and the earth splitting open years before it happened. She saw the chain reaction. She saw the end of the world. And because she saw it, her family became the only dragon riders left in existence. The Doom itself is a finished fire, a closed chapter written in ash. But the mystery of how one man knew to run, how one family escaped the end of everything, that story begins with the one who dreamed it all, before it ever came true. That story belongs to Daenys the Dreamer. The fires of Valyria gutted the greatest civilization the world had ever known in a single cataclysmic afternoon. The land of the 14 fires became their own pyre, and the dragon lords who once laughed at the gods burned alongside their slaves. But not a single Targaryen perished in the doom. That is the defining mystery of their survival. They were not the most powerful dragon lords. They were not the richest. They were a house of minor nobility among the 40 families who ruled the peninsula, and yet they escaped wholesale annihilation while the freehold crumbled into the sea. The answer lies not in steel, not in sorcery, not in political cunning. It lies in the closed eyes of a young girl. It lies in a dream. Her name was Daenys Targaryen. The histories call her Daenys the Dreamer. She was the daughter of Lord Aegon Targaryen, the patriarch of a house that history might have otherwise forgotten entirely. And in the rolling mist of prophecy that sometimes visits the blood of old Valyria, she saw what was coming. Understand the nature of these dreams. In the world of ice and fire, prophetic visions are often a curse. They are fragmented. They are haunted by metaphor, obscured by symbolism. The Targaryens themselves have a long history of descendants who saw visions and went mad trying to interpret them. But Daenys' dream was not a whisper, it was a hammer blow. She did not see a vague sense of doom. She saw the doom. She saw the 14 fires splitting open like rotten fruit. She saw the mountains vomiting molten stone into the sky. She saw the earth swallowing palaces and temples whole. She saw the statues of ancient dragon lords cracking and tumbling into the dust. She saw the end of her entire world, described with a clarity that should have been impossible. And she told her father, Lord Aegon Targaryen faced a choice that no man in Valyria had ever faced before. His daughter claimed the entire peninsula would be destroyed, not by an enemy army, not by a slave rebellion, but by the very land itself. The wise men of the freehold dismissed such talk as hysteria. The maesters who served the other houses would have laughed. The other dragon lords would have seen this as weakness, as superstition unbecoming of Valyrian blood. But Aegon believed her. This is the hinge upon which all of Westerosi history swings. Lord Aegon did not simply pay lip service to his daughter's warning. He did not build a summer house on the coast as insurance. He chose to abandon everything. He chose to move his entire house, his entire bloodline, his children, his wives, his dragons, his servants, his treasure, his knowledge. He chose to move all of it to a craggy volcanic outpost at the very edge of the known world. A bleak island fortress called Dragonstone, sitting alone in the narrow sea. It was an act of faith so profound, so audacious, that it must have seemed like madness to everyone who watched them go. They were the fools who fled the golden paradise of Valyria. And then they waited. This is the detail that deepens the entire story. Daenys the Dreamer did not have her vision the night before the disaster. The Targaryens did not flee in a panic with ash on their heels as the sky cracked open. The Doom of Valyria struck exactly 12 years after Lord Aegon moved his family to Dragonstone. 12 years. Think about what that means for the human experience of that family. For an entire decade they lived in exile on a lonely island, watching the distant glow of their homeland from across the sea. The other dragon lords of Valyria went about their business. The empire grew stronger. The sorcerers perfected their arts. The blood magic deepened its hold on the land. And all the while, the Targaryens sat on their black rock at the edge of the world, believing in a young girl's dream. They must have doubted themselves 1,000 times over. They must have whispered among themselves at night, wondering if they had thrown away their legacy for a child's nightmare. And then the earth screamed. The Doom of Valyria struck precisely as Daenys had seen it. The 14 fires erupted in a chain reaction that shattered the peninsula, drowned it in flame and water, and erased every single dragon lord who had stayed behind from the pages of history. The freehold of Valyria did not fall. It was detonated. Every palace, every dragon pit, every temple, every slave, gone. The greatest concentration of magic, power, and dragon blood in the history of the world, snuffed out in a single afternoon. And the Targaryens watched from Dragonstone. A single dream saved the bloodline of the dragon. Without the Dreamer, there would be no House Targaryen. There would be no Aegon the Conqueror. There would be no Iron Throne. There would be no Dance of the Dragons. There would be no Daenerys Stormborn emerging from the pyre to hatch the last dragons the world would ever know. Every single beat of the history that captivates us today, every triumph, every tragedy, every moment of dragonfire, it all rests upon the clenched fists of a young girl who dared to tell her father a terrifying truth, and a father who had the courage to listen. The Targaryens were saved. But they were saved into a world that had suddenly become wildly different. They were no longer a minor house within a vast empire. They were now the last dragon lords in existence, the last living connection to the power of Old Valyria. And they were alone on a volcanic island, staring across the narrow sea at a continent called Westeros, wondering what came next. Dragonstone had saved them, but it was only the beginning. The true foundation of their dynasty would need to be something more than a refuge from a ruined world. It would need to be a seat of power, a fortress that could launch a conquest. It would need to become the Seat of Dragonstone. So Lord Aegon Targaryen listened to his daughter Daenys, heeded her dream of fire and ash, and made a decision that would echo through millennia. He gathered his household, his dragons, his wealth, and sailed west from the crumbling heart of Valyria. The year was 114 before the conquest, and the destination was a grim, volcanic island at the mouth of the Blackwater Bay, a place that had long been a Valyrian outpost, but never a permanent home. That island was Dragonstone, and when the Targaryens first set foot upon its black, jagged shores, they were not conquerors, they were refugees, a single Dragonlord family, fleeing a cataclysm they alone had foreseen, carrying with them the last living dragons of a dying empire. But in that exile lay the seed of a legacy. Dragonstone would become more than a sanctuary. It would become the first Targaryen stronghold in Westeros, the cradle of a dynasty that would one day unite the continent under fire and blood. Think about the strategic genius of that choice. The island sits in the narrow sea, right at the eastern approach to the mainland. It commands the sea lanes between Westeros and Essos. Any fleet sailing from Braavos, Pentos, or the Free Cities must pass within sight of its towers. For a family with dragons, this was the perfect staging ground. They could launch attacks east or west, control trade, and monitor every movement in the region. But more than that, Dragonstone was a statement. It was a foothold on a continent that had never known Valyrian rule, a bridgehead from which the future would be built. The Targaryens did not build Dragonstone, they carved it. The Valyrians possessed a secret art known as stone turning, a magic that allowed them to shape rock as if it were clay, fusing it without mortar, creating structures that seemed to grow from the earth itself. The great fortress of Dragonstone, its walls, its drum tower, its massive stone keep, all of it was wrought by that ancient sorcery. The stones were not laid, they were grown. The walls curve in organic, flowing lines, like the spine of some enormous beast. The towers rise in twisted, dragon-scale patterns. The Great Hall is a cavern of obsidian and basalt, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows across walls that seem to breathe. This architectural legacy is not just beautiful, it is a weapon. The stone turners of Valyria understood that a fortress should be intimidating, that it should speak of power before a single arrow is loosed. Dragonstone does that. It is a dark, brooding presence, a black fang jutting from the sea, visible for miles. And from its highest towers, the Targaryens could watch the sun rise over the lands they would one day claim. For 12 years, the family remained on Dragonstone, isolated, waiting. They saw the doom come, felt the earth tremble even across the narrow sea, watched the sky turn red as Valyria burned. And when the smoke cleared, they were alone, the only dragon lords left in the world. But they were not idle. Over those years, they fortified their island, bred their dragons, and studied the 7 kingdoms they would one day conquer. Dragonstone became not just a home, but a hatching ground for ambition. It was here that Aegon the Conqueror was born. Here that he dreamed of unification. Here that he planned the invasion that would forge the Iron Throne. Every Targaryen monarch who followed would look back to Dragonstone as the origin point, the first stone of their dynasty. And in the centuries that followed, even as the throne moved to King's Landing, Dragonstone remained the seat of the heir apparent, the Prince of Dragonstone, a reminder that power flows from that black rock. But before the conquest, before the great wars, there was simply the island and the family, a family who had listened to a dreamer, who had crossed the sea, and who had found their new world in the shadow of a volcano. They were not yet kings, they were survivors. And on Dragonstone, they would wait and grow and prepare for the moment when the dragons would fly west. That moment would come, but only after the bloodline was tested, after the Targaryens learned to keep their power pure through a practice that would become both their strength and their curse, the purity of blood, a doctrine that would bind them together, even as it tore them apart. From the moment Lord Aegon Targaryen planted his family's banner on the windswept island of Dragonstone, he carried not only the blood of Old Valyria, but also a tradition so deeply woven into his house that it became its defining and most unsettling legacy. The Targaryens believed that to keep their connection to dragons alive, to preserve the magic that made them lords of fire and sky, they must never allow their blood to mix with the common stock of Westeros. This was not a mere preference, it was a doctrine. The purity of the Valyrian bloodline became the single most sacred commandment of their dynasty, and it demanded a practice that every other great house in the Seven Kingdoms found both alien and abhorrent. In the ancient freehold, brother and sister marriage was not unheard of among the noble families, but the Targaryens elevated it to a religious and political necessity. They claimed that the Dragon Lords of Valyria had always wed within the family to keep the blood strong, and that any dilution would weaken their bond with their dragons, perhaps even cause the creatures themselves to wither and refuse to hatch. Whether this was true or a convenient myth, the Targaryens clung to it with fierce devotion. And so, when Aegon the Conqueror looked upon the continent of Westeros and dreamed of forging a single kingdom under one crown, he did not stand alone as a king. He stood with his two sisters, Rhaenyra and Rhaenys, each as much a queen as he was a king, each his wife and companion. This was the foundation stone of the Targaryen dynasty. The union of the three siblings. Aegon, the eldest, took both his sisters to wife, a practice that would echo down the generations for nearly 300 years. Rhaenyra, the elder sister, was fierce and martial, a warrior in her own right who wielded the Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister and rode the great dragon Vargar. Rhaenys, the younger, was more graceful, charming and playful, the rider of the golden-scaled Meraxes. Together, they were the three heads of the dragon that Aegon's own prophecy had spoken of. Their bond was not only one of blood and marriage, but of war and conquest. Each sister played a distinct role in the campaigns that would see the Seven Kingdoms, save Dawn, brought to heel beneath the shadow of Balerion's wings. But beyond the immediate practicality of their alliance, the marriage of Aegon to Rhaenyra and Rhaenys set a precedent that would haunt every Targaryen monarch who followed. It normalized the idea that the only suitable match for a dragon lord was another dragon lord, and that shared blood was the true marker of nobility. Over the centuries, this insular approach produced a dynasty that grew increasingly isolated, arrogant and brittle. While other houses married for alliances, for land, or peace, the Targaryens married for themselves, for a purity that could only be maintained by turning inward. And as the generations passed, that inward turn bred not only strength, but also madness, covetousness, and a fractious instability that would eventually tear the house apart. The three sisters themselves were far from interchangeable. Rhaenyra was often described as stern and severe, a woman of few words and quick action. She wore chainmail under her gowns and was not afraid to take to the battlefield herself. Rhaenys, by contrast, was more diplomatic, using charm and wit to win over lords where Rhaenyra might have burned their castles. Aegon trusted both, but it was said he loved Rhaenys more, a subtle imbalance that would not be forgotten. Their dynamic laid the groundwork for the internal rivalries that would simmer beneath the surface of Targaryen rule for centuries. In many ways, the Dance of the Dragons itself, the civil war, the heart of House of the Dragon, can be traced back to the tensions inherent in a family where brother and sister were both spouses and competitors for the throne. What made this arrangement work in the beginning was a shared purpose. Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys were united in a mission that dwarfed personal jealousy. They were conquerors, founders, unifiers. Each needed the other's dragon, counsel and presence to succeed. But once the conquest was complete, once the Iron Throne was forged from the swords of fallen enemies, the question of succession became a breeding ground for conflict. The very blood purity they so prized would make every succession a crisis, because there were always too many claimants with equally strong claims, each believing their own Valyrian blood entitled them to rule. And so the tradition of sister wives, of keeping the bloodline pure, became both the Targaryens' greatest strength and their deepest flaw. It gave them dragons when other houses had none. It made them seem godlike, untouchable, chosen. But it also isolated them from the very realms they ruled. The lords of Westeros could never truly trust a family that looked only to itself for marriage, that produced children whose mothers were also aunts and sisters. The practice bred a psychological distance that no amount of conquest could bridge. You can feel the weight of that distance when you study the early years of Aegon's reign. His queens did not simply sit at his side. They ruled as equals, each holding court in her own right, each managing portions of the kingdom. Rhaenys often travelled the realm, listening to petitions, settling disputes, while Visenya remained at court, overseeing the training of knights and the enforcement of law. Their partnership was a model of efficiency, but it was an efficiency built on incest, on a carefully managed genetic pool that the rest of Westeros could only observe from afar. When Aegon eventually died, his son by Rhaenys, Aenys, took the throne, but his rule was weak, and many lords rebelled, doubting the legitimacy of a half-sister queen's offspring. The stability that the three sisters had forged began to crack almost immediately. The purity they had guarded so fiercely could not prevent the petty ambitions of mortal men. In the end, it was not the blood that held the realm together, but the dragons themselves. And once the dragons began to shrink, once they grew smaller and fewer, the Targaryens' claim to superiority began to shrink with them. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before any of that could unfold, before the cracks appeared in the dynasty's foundation, there was the conquest itself. And to understand the conquest, you must first understand the three who made it possible. The siblings, the spouses, the three heads of the dragon. The next chapter will take us directly into the fires of Aegon's war, into the battles that reshaped a continent, and the decisions that set the Targaryen dynasty on its long and bloody path. But for now, let this truth settle. The purity of blood was never pure. It was a choice, a sacrifice, and a curse woven into a single thread of Valyrian gold, and that thread would one day snap. This obsession with pure bloodlines, with marriages between brother and sister, shaped more than just the Targaryen family tree. It shaped the entire political destiny of a continent, because it was precisely this unbroken line of dragon lords, united by blood and bound by fire, that allowed one man to attempt something no one had ever done before: the unification of Westeros under a single crown. That man was Aegon Targaryen, the first of his name, and we call his war simply the Conquest. 300 years before the events of Game of Thrones, the Seven Kingdoms were 7 independent realms, each with its own king, its own laws, its own proud history. They fought each other constantly, but they had never faced a common enemy that moved not with armies alone, but with creatures that turn entire battlefields into ash. Aegon landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, with a force that was modest by any standard, perhaps a few thousand men, but he brought with him 3 dragons, Valyrian, Varga and Meraxes, and those dragons were the true instruments of his ambition. Valyrian was the largest and the oldest, a beast so vast that his shadow could swallow a town. His fire was black and red, and men called him the Black Dread. For the terror he inspired was as much psychological as it was physical. Vhagar, ridden by Aegon's sister-wife Visenya, was nearly as formidable, a seasoned war dragon with a temperament as fierce as her rider. Meraxes, the third sister, carried Rhaenys into battle, and together these three creatures functioned not as mere weapons, but as a mobile air force capable of striking any stronghold in the realm within days. No castle walls could stop them, no army could counter them, and no king could bargain with them. The defining moment of the Conquest came in the Reach, at a place that would be remembered as the Field of Fire. There, the combined forces of House Gardner, the King of the Reach, and House Lannister, the King of the Rock, met Aegon's army in open battle. They had assembled the largest host Westeros had ever seen, tens of thousands of men, confident that sheer numbers would overwhelm the invaders. But they had never faced dragonfire on a mass scale. Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys mounted their dragons and flew directly into the enemy formation. The heat was so intense that the grass itself caught fire, and men in armour were cooked alive inside their own steel. The field burned for days. Both kings, the Gardner King and the Lannister King, were killed in the Inferno. After that, the great houses began to surrender. One by one, the rulers of the Seven Kingdoms bent the knee. The Starks of the North, after witnessing the destruction, chose to kneel rather than fight. The Arryns of the Vale held out in the mountains, but eventually accepted Aegon's rule. The Tullys, the Greyjoys, the Baratheons, all submitted. Only Dorne would never be conquered, a story for another time. But for the rest, Aegon demanded not just their crowns, but the swords of their defeated warriors. He took those blades, thousands upon thousands of them, and he had his dragon Balerion melt them down with his fiery breath. The red-hot steel was twisted together, a chaotic mass of sharp edges and jagged points, and from that mass the Iron Throne was forged. It was not a throne of comfort, it was a seat of power, designed to cut any who sat carelessly. The throne itself would undergo a remarkable transformation over the centuries. In the time of the Targaryen dynasty at its height, as depicted in House of the Dragon, the Iron Throne was far larger, far more treacherous, with 1,000 swords rising like a dark forest behind the king. By the time it in Game of Thrones, many blades have been removed or broken off, and the throne is smaller, less intimidating. That evolution, how a symbol of absolute power can shrink and soften as the dynasty itself weakens, is a story worth exploring in its own right. Aegon the Conqueror united the kingdoms of Westeros through the fire of his dragons, but the symbol of his rule, the enduring physical representation of his absolute authority, was forged from the very weapons of his defeated enemies. He gathered thousands of swords from the Field of Fire, from the fallen kings of the Reach and the Stormlands, and had them twisted, melted, and reshaped into a single monstrous throne, bathed in the furnace heat of Balerion the Black Dread. This was the Iron Throne, but it was not born in the form. In the later years of the dynasty, the throne you think you know is actually a shadow of its former self. In the world of Game of Thrones, the throne is a jagged, imposing stairway leading up to a bulky seat of power. It looks as if swords were loosely piled and fused together, a rough and brutalist sculpture. It is formidable, yes, but it is also relatively contained. It sits upon a platform, and the king climbs a dozen steps to reach it. But in House of the Dragon, which takes place nearly 200 years before the fall of the Mad King, the throne is something else entirely. It is grander, more chaotic, and significantly sharper. The sheer size of it is overwhelming, filling the entire apse of the throne room. Swords stand upright around the seat, forming a dense, jagged nest of iron. The version in Game of Thrones feels like a large chair that swords have been piled onto. The version in House of the Dragon is a mountain of steel, a fortress of blades, where the swords are not just decoration, they are the very structure itself. It is a vertical wall of steel that encloses the king on all sides, and it reflects the height of Targaryen power before the decline ever took root. This design choice by the showrunners is no small detail. The upright swords surrounding the seat represent the absolute nature of the monarchy. The king does not just sit above his subjects, he sits within a cage of their broken might. The symbolic meaning runs deep. The throne encloses the ruler, isolates them, but it also constantly threatens them. Aegon the Conqueror is said to have remarked that a king should never sit easy, and the throne ensures this. The blades are not just decorative trophies. They are sharp, they are dangerous, and they draw blood. King Maegor the Cruel, the son of Aegon, was notoriously cut by the throne so often that the iron seemed to sap away his strength, a physical manifestation of the realm rejecting his harsh rule. The throne has a will of its own in the history of Westeros. It is a sentinel over the court, and it judges the king. And this brings us to why the throne's appearance in House of the Dragon is so crucial for understanding the story. It signifies the beginning of the Targaryen decline. When a symbol is at its largest, its most intimidating, it usually means the dynasty it represents is its absolute apex. The throne in House of the Dragon is the throne at its peak. It is the raw, unfiltered power of the Dragon Lords, a dynasty that commands the largest beasts the world has ever seen and rules over an entire continent without question. But this apex is immediately followed by the fall. The very size and desirability of this seat of power creates a target that the family will inevitably tear itself apart to claim. The iron cage that holds the king is also a trap. The throne is so vast and so imposing that it dwarfs every man who sits on it, a visual reminder that no single ruler can truly fill the legacy of Aegon. The swords of the conquered will soon be redrawn in a war between the dragons. So as we leave the shadow of this vast, sprawling throne, it is impossible not to feel the weight of history pressing down on it. The court is filled with whispers, the succession is fractured, and the throne looms over every decision, every alliance, every betrayal, like a physical storm cloud made of steel. It is the prize, and it is the grave. Every sword in that throne represents a broken oath or a conquered kingdom, and very soon, the family that built it will begin to bleed upon it. In the very next chapter of our deep lore journey, we cross the threshold into that inevitable conflict. The glory gives way to the fire, the family turns on itself, and the war that fractures the Targaryen dynasty forever begins. The Dance of the Dragons. The Iron Throne you see in House of the Dragon is not the same throne from Game of Thrones. It is larger, more chaotic, a bristling forest of twisted blades and jagged steps, a monument to a dynasty still at the height of its power. But that power was never meant to last. Within a few generations, that very throne would become the prize in a war that tore the Targaryen family apart and nearly wiped their dragons from the world. This is the story of the Dance of the Dragons. The Dance of the Dragons is the brutal civil war that serves as the core plot of this entire prequel. It is not a war between rival houses or foreign invaders. It is a war within the family itself, a bloody schism between two factions of the same bloodline, each claiming the right to sit on that monstrous chair of swords. The kingdom was split down the middle, and the conflict would be so devastating that it would mark the beginning of the end for Targaryen rule in Westeros. The ideological split at the heart of the war is between two factions known as the Blacks and the Greens. The Blacks took their name from the colours of Princess Rhaenyra's house, the black dragon of her personal sigil. The Greens, in turn, took theirs from the green of Queen Alicent Hightower's dresses and the symbol of her father Otto's house. But these were not mere fashion choices. The division represented a fundamental question of succession, a question that had never been answered in the Seven Kingdoms before. Could a woman inherit the Iron Throne? Princess Rhaenyra was the named heir of King Viserys I. Her father had declared it before the entire realm, and the lords of Westeros had sworn oaths to support her claim. She was the firstborn child of his first marriage, and she had been raised to rule. She was intelligent, determined, and courageous, and she rode the dragon Syrax. But when Viserys died, his eldest son by his second wife, Queen Alicent, was crowned instead. His name was Aegon II, and his supporters argued that the Iron Throne must pass to a man, not a woman. The Greens saw Rhaenyra as a usurper, a woman who would disrupt the natural order. The Blacks saw Aegon as a traitor, a usurper himself who had broken his father's will. The war that followed was not fought just on the ground. It was fought in the sky, with fire and tooth and claw. Dragon fought dragon for the first time in Westerosi history, and the consequences were catastrophic. The Targaryens had grown accustomed to using their dragons as instruments of terror against enemies who had none. Now the enemy had dragons too. The skies above the Riverlands, the Stormlands, and the Crownlands became scenes of unimaginable violence. Beasts that had been herded and tamed for a century turned on one another, tearing each other apart while riders screamed and fell. The realm had never seen such destruction, and it would never recover from the shock. The Dance of the Dragons was not a clean war with a clear hero or villain. It was a brutal, grinding conflict that orphaned children, burned cities, and emptied the royal treasury. It lasted roughly 2 years, though some accounts stretched the timeline slightly, and by the end, the Targaryen dynasty was a shadow of its former self. The dragons themselves were nearly extinct, and the Iron Throne would never again be as grand or as terrible as it had been in those days before the war. But how did it all begin? How did a father's choice and a mother's ambition turn brother against sister, uncle against niece, and dragon against dragon? That is the story of the succession crisis. The moment when King Viserys died, and the realm was forced to choose between two rightful claims. The seeds of the dance were sown long before the first battle, and we will turn now to look at those seeds, at the choices that led to the most devastating war in Targaryen history. Viserys I's reign should have been remembered as a golden age, a time of peace, of prosperity, when the dragons ruled the skies unchallenged and the dynasty stood secure. Instead, it became the prelude to annihilation. The ideological split between the Blacks and the Greens was not merely a disagreement over who was the better ruler. It was a fracture in the very foundation of the realm. A crack that had been spreading for years before the first blow was ever struck. The conflict we know as the Dance of the Dragons had a single undeniable point of origin. The succession crisis that began when a grieving king chose his daughter over the traditions of 1,000 years. King Viserys I Targaryen was a man who loved peace, perhaps more than he loved wisdom. He inherited a stable realm from his grandfather, the old King Jaehaerys I. But he also inherited a wound. Jaehaerys' great council at Harrenhal in 101 AC had settled the matter of succession by passing over the female line the claim of Princess Rhaenys in favour of a male heir. That heir was Viserys himself. The precedent was clear, the legal weight undeniable. But when Viserys' beloved wife Aemma Arryn died in the birthing bed, her son Balon dying with her, the king refused to accept the council's logic. His grief was a living thing, a fire that burned away his judgment. He looked at his only surviving child, his daughter Rhaenyra, and he saw the last remnant of the woman he loved. In an act that was both tender and catastrophic, he named Rhaenyra his heir. He commanded the lords of the Seven Kingdoms to swear oaths to her, to accept her as the future queen. It was a direct contradiction of the very framework that had put him on the throne, and it planted the seeds of a war that would consume his house. The political fallout did not erupt immediately. It festered. Viserys remarried, taking Alicent Hightower as his queen, the daughter of his hand, Otto Hightower. And Otto, a patient and calculating man, understood the fragility of the king's decree. When Alicent bore sons, first Aegon, then Aemond, the question of succession became a ticking clock. The realm watched as the king grew sicker, as his body wasted and his will grew weak. And the small council, those men who were sworn to serve the realm, began to serve themselves instead. Otto Hightower, Larys Strong, the Grand Maester Orwyle, and Sir Criston Cole, a sworn shield who had turned his cloak out of a broken heart and bitter pride. They formed the core of the Green faction. They whispered. They planned. They systematically moved their pieces across the board, preparing for the moment the king would finally fail. And when that moment came, when Viserys died in his sleep, they acted with a ruthlessness that left no room for challenge. The king's death was concealed. The body was hidden. The city of King's Landing was sealed. The small council did not summon Rhaenyra. They did not honour the king's wishes. Instead, they crowned Aegon II in the Dragon Pit. They fabricated a dying wish, a misinterpreted whisper about Aegon's dream, to give their usurpation a veneer of legitimacy. The transition of power was not a transition at all. It was a coup, swift and absolute, a knife in the dark, driven by the ambition of old men who would not bow to a woman. The word of the king, the oaths of 1,000 lords, the blood of the dragon itself, all of it was swept aside in a single ruthless night. That choice, that stolen throne, sparked a conflict that was both immediate and horrifyingly bloody. Rhaenyra, crowned in her own ceremony on Dragonstone, declared war. The realm was forced to choose, and in the choosing, families were split, ancient alliances were sundered, and the fire and blood of the Targaryen dynasty turned inward. The first battles were not fought with armies. They were fought with dragons. The death of Lucerys Velaryon over Storm's End, a hunted prince torn from the sky by his own uncle's beast, was the spark that turned a political crisis into a war of annihilation. The succession crisis had ended. The dance of the dragons had begun, and the war would be decided not just by the crowns of kings and queens, but by the strength of those who stood behind them. The most powerful of those allies, the man whose fleet controlled the seas and whose gold bankrolled the war, was the sea snake, Lord Corlys Velaryon. His choice, his legacy, and the cost of his loyalty are the threads we must unravel next. The crowning of Aegon II was a hammer blow that shattered the last pretense of peace in King Viserys' realm. Princess Rhaenyra, isolated on Dragonstone, found herself confronting a stark reality. The Greens controlled the capital, the treasury, and the king, but they did not control the sea. And in a war fought between dragon lords, it was the sea that would prove to be the decisive battlefield. The man who commanded that sea was the linchpin of the entire conflict. His name was Corlys Velaryon, the Lord of the Tides and Master of the Seas. He earned his legendary nickname, the Sea Snake, not through bloodshed, but through exploration. While the Targaryens contented themselves with the politics of the Red Keep, Corlys sailed east to the very edge of the known world. He made 9 legendary voyages beyond the ruined peninsula of Valyria, past the mysterious cities of the Jade Sea, to Ashai and the Shadowlands beyond. From these journeys he brought back silks, spices, and treasures that no Westerosi lord had ever laid eyes upon. He amassed a fortune so vast that House Velaryon became the wealthiest house in all of Westeros, eclipsing even the Lannisters of Casterly Rock. His success was not a matter of inheritance, but of sheer ambition and will. This brings us to a fundamental question about House Velaryon. They were a Valyrian house, sharing the same silver-gold hair and purple eyes as the Targaryens. They had dragons in their past, yet they did not build their legacy upon them. Why did the Velaryons focus on naval supremacy instead of dragon riding? It was a choice born of both fortune and strategic wisdom. The Targaryens possessed the largest dragons, the instruments of continental conquest. The Velaryons, from their earliest days in the Narrow Sea, understood that true power over the realm lay in controlling its waters. Their dragons were fewer and smaller, and over generations they simply stopped breeding them in great numbers. Instead, they built the greatest fleet the Seven Kingdoms had ever known. Their ships cut through the waves with unmatched speed. Their captains knew every current and every hidden reef from the wall to the stepstones. They made Driftmark the shield of Dragonstone. The Sea Snake understood that a fleet could blockade a city, strangle an army, and control trade in a way that a single dragon, no matter how large, could not. When the succession crisis erupted, the allegiance of this overwhelming naval power became the defining prize of the war. The alliance between House Velaryon and the Blacks was not a simple political calculation made in the aftermath of Viserys' death. It was sealed in blood and marriage long before the king drew his final breath. Corlys Velaryon was married to Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, whose own claim to the throne had been passed over in the Great Council of the year 101. The slight against her was a wound that never healed. Their children, Laenor and Laena, were the living embodiment of the union between the two houses. Laenor was betrothed to Rhaenyra herself. Laena became the wife of Prince Daemon. The alliance was absolute, a bond of blood, grievance and ambition. The sea snake threw his entire fortune and his entire fleet behind Rhaenyra's cause. His ships blockaded the gullet, cutting King's Landing off from the trade of the narrow sea. His gold paid the sellswords and the river lords. Without Corlys Velaryon, Rhaenyra would have been a queen without a kingdom, a dragon rider without an army. With him, she became a true threat to the Iron Throne. The Sea Snake's legacy is the very definition of deep lore. He is the engine that makes the Black faction viable, the architect of their strategy, the source of their wealth. His story is a testament to a different kind of power, a power built on salt and sea spray, on the courage to sail beyond the horizon. He was a kingmaker in an age of dragon lords, a man whose name would be spoken with respect from the Summer Isles to the walls of Ashai. He proved that a legacy written in waves can be just as enduring as one written in fire and blood. And yet, for all the epic scale of his voyages and the profound weight of his political choices, the legacy of House of the Dragon in our own time is sometimes defined by the smallest, most human moments. Amidst the dragons and the war, a single, perfectly pronounced phrase uttered in a press interview captured the hearts of millions. A chance encounter between two actors, a simple drink order, and the unmatchable chemistry of a single moment created a cultural phenomenon entirely its own. The story of the Negroni Sbagliato phenomenon is a testament to the magic that can happen when the world of Westeros collides with our own. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. A master of the seas, Corlys Velaryon built his legacy on the understanding that power is often exercised in the spaces others overlook. The open water, the trade routes, the quiet accumulation of influence that didn't require a dragon's roar to be felt across the narrow sea. It is a lesson that applies just as well to the modern world of media, where the most impactful moments of a show's cultural footprint often arrive not from a carefully scripted battle or a shocking death, but from a fleeting, unscripted exchange that catches fire in the public imagination. This phenomenon, the spontaneous combustion of a single moment into a global talking point, is a rare and unpredictable gift, and perhaps no example in recent memory illustrates this better than the strange, beautiful, and utterly viral incident that redefined the public perception of during its first season. It began not on the set, but on a sofa, surrounded by bright lights and microphones. During a press junket in October of 2022, the cast was scattered across the couches, comfortable in that practiced way of exhausted actors, enduring another round of surface-level questions. An interviewer, likely expecting standard fare about working with dragons, or the pressure of the legacy, asked a deceptively simple question. What would each cast member order at a bar? The answers trickled in, generic enough, polite enough, but then the microphone turned to Aemma Darcy, the woman tasked with bringing the adult Rhaenyra Targaryen to life, and the world leaned in. Aemma Darcy answered in a measured, almost poetic cadence. Their voice dropped, a low and textured murmur that felt entirely disconnected from the superficial energy of a press junket. They said, "A Negroni, Sbagliato, with Prosecco in it." There was a pause. The words hung in the air, and Olivia Cook, seated directly next to them, the woman who plays Rhaenyra's former best friend and eventual mortal enemy Alicent Hightower, reacted in real time. Her face softened, a smile crept across her lips, and she locked eyes with her co-star. With a voice full of playful reverence, she simply said, Ooh, stunning. That was it. A drink order, a compliment, and the internet, in its infinite hunger for authenticity, devoured it whole. The clip spread faster than wildfire through the dry brush of social media. It was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. It was dissected, remixed, parodied, and adored. The Negroni Sbagliato, an Italian cocktail whose name literally translates to a mistaken Negroni, suddenly became the most ordered drink in bars across the world. Bartenders reported a massive surge in requests for the specific Prosecco-filled variant. A forgotten aperitif was resurrected by the simple, hypnotic delivery of an actor who clearly had no idea they had just created a cultural milestone. But why did this moment resonate so deeply? Why did a simple exchange about an alcoholic beverage become the most iconic soundbite of the entire press tour? The answer lies in the profound tension the moment revealed. On screen, Rhaenyra and Alicent are defined by tragedy. Their friendship, forged in the innocence of girlhood, is systematically dismantled by the machinations of their fathers and husbands. By the time the Dance of the Dragons begins, they are enemies. They are the figureheads of a civil war that will end the Age of Dragons. Their relationship is one of simmering rage, grief and betrayal. And yet, here was Olivia Cooke, looking at Emma Darcy with genuine warmth. Here was Emma Darcy, speaking in a tone that felt intimate and unguarded. The real-world chemistry between the two actresses was so palpable that it broke through the fourth wall and reshaped how the audience perceived the show. The impact of this single moment on the show's marketing and popularity cannot be overstated. The production team, savvy to the organic gift they had been given, leaned into the phenomenon. Suddenly, it wasn't just a grim saga of succession and violence. It was the show where the two leads clearly adored each other. It was the show with the Negroni Sbagliato. This humanized the conflict in a way that no official poster or trailer ever could. The audience could look at the cold fury of the green dress and the black dress and see the ghost of a friendship. The memes created a bridge for casual viewers, a low-barrier entry point to a world of dense lore and intricate politics. It allowed the audience to hold two truths in their hands at once: the tragedy of the characters and the affection of the actors. The genuine connection between Olivia Cooke and Emma Darcy fueled the on-screen rivalry by giving it a foundation. You could feel what was lost. You could grieve for a friendship that in the books and in the show was already ashes. The chemistry off-screen made the hatred on-screen more tragic. This phenomenon is a testament to a specific kind of accidental genius. No marketing team could have planned it. No algorithm could have manufactured it. It was the raw, unfiltered moment of two performers who truly respected each other, caught in a rare moment of vulnerability during a grinding press tour that became a rallying cry. It became a symbol of the tension between Alicent and Rhaenyra. Not the tension of enemies, but the tension of a bond that was never truly severed, only twisted. The legacy of the Negroni Sbagliato is a reminder that the audience craves connection. They want to believe in the world they are watching, and when the actors themselves seem to bleed into their roles, when the admiration is real, it elevates the entire narrative. To capture this specific magic and prevent it from fracturing the character's integrity, the production team employed a very deliberate, almost radical approach to how they handled the two actresses who played Rhaenyra. This calculated separation, designed to preserve the distinct stages of a single woman's life, is known internally as the Two Rhaenyras Strategy, and it reveals a profound understanding of how to build a character across the chasm of time. The viral Negroni Sbagliato moment captured a spark of genuine friendship between Olivia Cooke and Emma Darcy. It felt effortless, a glimpse of the actors behind the crowns. But the character at the heart of that tension, Rhaenyra, was born from a much different kind of chemistry, or rather, a deliberate lack of it. Director Miguel Sapochnik made a deeply unconventional choice regarding the evolution of the show's central protagonist. He kept Millie Alcock, who played the younger Rhaenyra, and Emma Darcy, who took over the role for the older version. completely separated during filming. They did not meet on set during the transition. Their paths were not allowed to cross until the narrative mandate demanded it. The primary intention was clear. Sopocnik wanted to prevent the actresses from influencing each other's performances. In a normal scenario, an actor taking over a role might study the previous performance, mimicking mannerisms and vocal cadences to create a seamless bridge. Think about how many times you see this in other shows. A younger and older actor practicing the same accent, the same hand gesture. It creates continuity, but Sopocnik gambled that continuity would be the enemy of the story's emotional truth. Rhaenyra's trauma comes from the fact that she stops recognizing herself. How could we, as the audience, recognize her if the performance was too smooth? By enforcing this physical and professional separation, the director aimed to maintain a distinct character evolution across the mid-season time jump. This was not just a recasting, it was a ritual of transformation. Millie's Rhaenyra was fire and rebellion, a girl who believed she could command the world. Emma's Rhaenyra was ash and iron, a woman who had learned that the world was a battlefield and no one was coming to save her. The transition into episode 6 is deliberately jarring. You are ripped from the high drama of the time jump and thrown into a world that feels colder. The throne room is darker, the colours are muted, and the face of the princess is no longer that of the girl you trusted. It is a brilliant narrative trick, but it is rooted in this very specific, almost monastic directorial decision to isolate the two halves of the same soul. For Millie Alcock, this meant she had to complete her arc fully ignorant of how Emma Darcy would interpret the role. She had to play the tragedy of Rhaenyra's youth without the cheat sheet of knowing how it all turned out. For Emma Darcy, it meant inheriting a role that was not handed to them with a manual of established quirks. They had to reinvent the character from the ashes of the first 5 episodes. The risk was immense. It could have felt like 2 different shows. Instead, because of the sheer talent involved and the audacity of the director's strategy, it felt like the rawest possible depiction of a soul fractured by time. The psychological effect of the separate Rhaenyras on the audience is subtle but devastating. Because the performances were never blended or softened by rehearsal, the audience feels the full, shocking weight of the time jump. You do not see Rhaenyra age gracefully, you see her replaced. It mirrors the very real disconnect Rhaenyra has with her own past. The girl in the dragon pit, laughing with her uncle, is a stranger to the woman sitting on the council. The show, by keeping the actresses apart, ensures we feel that same estrangement. We mourn the loss of Millie's Rhaenyra just as the character herself mourns the loss of her innocence. We are often critics of recasting it as a flaw, but here, the jarring nature of the change was the entire point. It forced us to feel the tragedy of Rhaenyra's transformation as a physical shock. We didn't just see her grow up. We saw the light in her eyes die, and a different light, a harder, more calculating one, switch on. It is a testament to the discipline of the production, that what could have been a gimmick became the emotional pivot of the entire season. This level of meticulous separation to craft a single character is one thing, but what happens when a performer has to inhabit a character who is defined by decades of war and violence? The physical and mental transformation required is a different beast entirely, and that takes us directly into the grueling, hour-and-a-half-long ritual that completely redefines the character for the screen. The secrets behind Daemon's transformation are waiting. The previous chapter explored the deliberate separation of Millie Alcock and Emma Darcy, a directorial choice to preserve the distinct identities of young and older Rhaenyra. But while that strategy was about keeping 2 halves of one character apart, the transformation of another character required a different kind of alchemy entirely. A daily physical metamorphosis that blurred the line between actor and legend. Matt Smith, known to many as the 11th Doctor from Doctor Who, faced a unique challenge when he stepped into the role of Daemon Targaryen. The character is described in George R.R. Martin's as a warrior of immense skill and a prince of volatile temper, a man who had already lived through decades of battle and exile by the time the Dance of the Dragons begins. To embody that weathered, battle-hardened presence, Smith had to surrender nearly 2 hours of his life every single day to a chair in the makeup trailer. That routine, clocking in at roughly 1.5 hours, was not merely cosmetic, it was a ritual of transformation. The process began with the application of a full prosthetic nose, crafted to give Smith's face a more pronounced, almost aquiline Targaryen profile. Then came the layered application of scars. Not the clean, heroic scars of a storybook knight, but the ragged, uneven marks of a man who has survived skirmishes, duels, and perhaps the backhand of a dragon's tail. These were not painted on. They were sculpted, piece by piece, using silicone and adhesive, each one telling a silent story of a fight won or a wound barely survived. The makeup team, led by Amanda Wilson, designed a look that aged Smith by a decade or more, adding a weathered texture to his skin that suggested years under the Westerosi sun and the perpetual shadow of dragon wings. They darkened his brow and deepened the lines around his eyes, not to make him look old, but to make him look. A man who has seen the worst of the world and learned to smile through it. This was the face of the rogue prince, a man who had been exiled, returned, and exiled again. A man who had killed his first wife in a fit of rage, and then laughed about it. The makeup did not just change Smith's appearance, it changed his presence. But the transformation did not end with his face. The Targaryen wig, a cascade of silver-white hair that reached past his shoulders, was a character in itself. It was heavy, hot, and required constant maintenance. Under the studio lights, the synthetic fibers could become uncomfortable, clinging to the skin and trapping heat. Smith has spoken about the physical toll of wearing it, especially during long days of filming in the heat of the soundstage. The wig, combined with the leather and metal of Daemon's armor, turned each day of shooting into a test of endurance. The armor itself was not a lightweight costume piece. It was a functional suit of steel and hardened leather, designed to look like it had been worn through a dozen campaigns. Every time Smith moved, the armor creaked and groaned, a constant reminder of the weight of the role he was carrying. This physical discomfort was not a distraction, it was a tool. Smith has said that the process of becoming Daemon, the hours in makeup, the weight of the armor, the constriction of the wig, helped him access the character's volatility. When he sat in the chair for 90 minutes each morning, he was not just waiting, he was shedding his own identity, letting the layers of prosthetic and costume build a shell around him. By the time he walked onto the set, he was no longer Matt Smith. He was the rogue prince, a man who could switch from a charming smile to a cold, calculating glare in the space of a heartbeat. That volatility is central to Daemon's character. He is a man of contradictions, a prince who loves his brother but also covets his throne, a warrior who is loyal to his family but ruthless to his enemies. The makeup and costume team understood that to make this character believable, they had to make him look like he had been through the wars, both literal and emotional. The scars on his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the slight hollowness in his cheeks. All of these were deliberate choices to suggest a man who had lived hard and loved harder, a man who was always on the edge of losing control. In many ways, this physical transformation mirrored the actor's own journey into the role. Smith had to learn to move like Daemon, to fight like Daemon, and to carry the weight of a crown he would never wear. The makeup was the first step in that process, a daily ritual that allowed him to shed his own skin and step into the skin of a dragon prince. It was a reminder that acting is not just about words and emotions. It is about the body, the face, the very presence of the actor in the space. And this brings us to the next layer of this world's depth, the language itself. The ancient tongue of Valyria, spoken by the Targaryens and their kin, is not just a collection of words. It is a key to understanding the culture and the history of the Dragon Lords. In the next chapter, we will explore how the show's creators built this language from the ground up, fusing elements of Latin and Arabic to create a sound that feels both ancient and alien. We will hear how the actors struggled with its guttural tones, and how mastering it became a rite of passage for those who would speak for the dragons. That is Chapter 14, The Language of Old Valyria. Matt Smith spent an hour and a half each day becoming Daemon Targaryen, but the transformation wasn't just skin deep. The words he spoke, the ancient, guttural commands to dragons, the whispered oaths, the shouted declarations in the heat of battle, those came from a language that had to be built from the ground up. Constructed languages are nothing new to fantasy, but the tongue of Old Valyria, as heard in, carries a weight that few fictional languages have ever achieved. It's a sound that feels both familiar and utterly alien, and that's no accident. The development of High Valyrian for the series was a monumental undertaking. The showrunners didn't want a few phrases scattered like set dressing. They needed a fully functional language, one that actors could learn to speak with conviction, and the key to making it sound real was a surprising fusion, Latin and Arabic. The linguist David J. Peterson, who had already created Dothraki 4, went back to the drawing board. He took the grammatical bones of Latin, its cases, its verb conjugations, its structured syntax, and then draped it in the phonetic flesh of Arabic. The result is a language that rolls off the tongue with a guttural, almost musical rhythm. You can hear the Latin in the declensions, but the vowels and consonants carry the desert heat of Arabic. This wasn't a random mix. It was a deliberate choice to evoke the ancient alien empire of Valyria, a civilization that was both sophisticated and brutal, a place where scholars wrote treatises in marble halls while dragons burned continents. But the real challenge came when the cameras rolled. Actors aren't linguists. They had to deliver lines of pure, unscripted High Valyrian with the same emotional weight as their English dialogue. Imagine being Matt Smith, standing on a dragon rig, leaf blowers whipping your hair, and you have to scream a command to a mythical beast in a language you've only been studying for weeks. One mistake, one misplaced syllable, and the scene shatters. The actors had to internalize the language so deeply that it became second nature, allowing rage, grief, and love to flow through those unfamiliar sounds. Emma Darcy, who plays Rhaenyra, described it as learning a new kind of muscle memory, where the emotion had to come first, and the words followed naturally. The result is a performance that feels authentic, not like someone reading a phonetic script, but like a native speaker in the throes of war. That authenticity adds a layer of historical depth and otherness to the lore. When you hear the Targaryens speak High Valyrian, you're reminded that they are not of Westeros. They are the last remnant of a fallen empire, a doomed civilization that vanished in fire and ash. The language itself becomes a symbol of their isolation and their pride. It separates them from the common tongue, from the lords and ladies who bow before them, and it reinforces the idea that they are dragons wearing human skin. In every line, you hear the echo of the Doom of Valyria, the loss of the 14 fires, the weight of 400 years of exile. And that's what makes the constructed language so much more than a gimmick. It's a character in its own right, a ghost that haunts every scene. As the dance of the dragons spirals into bloodshed, note how the language shifts. The greens and the blacks both claim the same heritage, but the way they wield the old tongue reveals their loyalties. In one moment it's a weapon, in another a prayer, and when a dragon answers a command in High Valyrian, you feel the ancient bond between beast and rider, a connection that predates the Iron Throne. The language is a thread tying the Targaryens to a past they can never reclaim, a past that is always just out of reach. And that past, as we'll see, has historical echoes that go beyond fiction. The wars of succession, the claims of inheritance, the fragile alliances, they all mirror a real conflict that tore England apart centuries ago, a conflict known as the English Anarchy, where a woman named Matilda fought her cousin Stephen for a crown that was rightfully hers. The parallels are uncanny, and they reveal just how deeply George R. Martin and the creators of have woven real history into their tapestry. But that story, and how it shaped every betrayal, every battle, every tear shed in this civil war, is one we'll explore next. And so, from the constructed syllables of High Valyria, a language born from the fusion of Latin and Arabic, spoken by actors who learned its cadences as though it were a living tongue, we turn now to something far older, something that existed long before George R.R. Martin ever put pen to paper. The words we heard on screen were built by linguists, but the story they told was built by history itself. And if you listen closely to the echoes of the Dance of the Dragons, you can hear the clatter of a very real, very bloody throne room from 12th century England. Let me tell you about the English Anarchy. You see, the conflict between the Blacks and the Greens, between Rhaenyra and Aegon II, did not spring fully formed from a writer's imagination. It was planted there, seeded by a period of chaos that the English call the Anarchy, a civil war that tore through the realm for nearly 2 decades, from 1135 to 1153. At the heart of it stood 2 claimants, a woman named Empress Matilda and her cousin Stephen of Blois, and the parallels to House of the Dragon are so precise that you might wonder whether Martin simply changed the names and added dragons. Think about it. King Henry I of England, like King Viserys I Targaryen, had a clear plan for his succession. Henry had lost his only legitimate son in a shipwreck, the White Ship disaster of 1120, leaving him with a daughter, Matilda, as his sole surviving legitimate child. He forced his nobles to swear oaths of loyalty to her, just as Viserys made the lords of Westeros swear to Rhaenyra. But when Henry died in 1135, his nephew Stephen, a charismatic, well-liked and ambitious man, rushed to London and seized the throne. Sound familiar? Stephen of Blois is Aegon II, crowned in haste while the rightful heir was far away. Matilda, like Rhaenyra, was in another part of the realm, gathering her supporters and preparing for war. But the English Anarchy was not just a succession squabble, it was a complete breakdown of law and order. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a contemporary record, described it in chilling terms. They said openly that Christ and his saints slept. Castles sprung up like weeds, each held by a baron who answered to no one. The land was ravaged by mercenaries. The common people suffered terribly, caught between 2 factions that cared more for a crown than for the lives beneath it. Does that not sound exactly like the Riverlands during the Dance of the Dragons? The burning of towns, the flight of small folk, the sense that the world had gone mad. George R.R. Martin, a historian at heart, did not simply copy this history. He adapted it, deepened it, wrapped it in the skin of fantasy. The English Anarchy gave him a framework. A woman denied her birthright, a cousin who usurped, a kingdom that fell into chaos. But Martin added dragons. He added the magic of prophecy, the tragic flaw of a dynasty that had grown too comfortable with fire and blood. He took the raw, brutal facts of 12th century England and asked, what if the throne itself was made of swords? What if the war was fought from the sky? What if the blood was not only spilled on the ground, but also inherited with every generation? That is the brilliance of his world building. The past is never dead. As Faulkner said, it is not even past. Martin knew that the struggles of medieval Europe, the wars of succession, the endless hunger for power are timeless. He gave them new names, new faces, new tongues, but the heart of the story remains the same. A crown that tears a family apart, a realm that bleeds, and a question that no one can answer. Who really has the right to rule? So when you watch the Blacks and the Greens tear each other apart, remember the English Anarchy. Remember Matilda, who fought and never wore the crown, but whose son, Henry II, would go on to become one of England's greatest kings. Remember Stephen, who won the throne but lost the peace. Remember that Martin built his world from the bricks of our own. And now, as we leave this chapter behind, the story deepens. We will look closer at the 2 women at the centre of it all, the Empress and the Princess, and see just how much of Rhaenyra Targaryen was shaped by Matilda of England. because sometimes the most fantastical tales begin with a single simple truth. History is the best storyteller of all. Up next, we examine that truth directly in a chapter called Matilda versus Rhaenyra. The English Anarchy gave us a blueprint for the chaos that would consume Westeros. But the real story lies in the people who lived it. And when you look closely at the Dance of the Dragons, you're not just seeing a fictional war. You're seeing the ghosts of 12th century England walking through King's Landing. The parallels between Empress Matilda and Princess Rhaenyra are so precise that it's almost as if George R.R. Martin had a history book open on his desk the entire time. But what does that mean for the characters we've come to know? It means that every broken oath, every whispered betrayal, every moment of a woman being told she cannot rule because of her sex, these are not just plot devices, they are echoes of a real struggle that shaped the English throne. Let's start with Matilda. She was the only surviving legitimate child of King Henry I of England. Henry had named her his heir, forcing his barons to swear oaths of allegiance to her. But when he died in 1135, those oaths evaporated like morning mist. Instead of Matilda, her cousin Stephen of Blois rode to London and seized the crown. Stephen was a man after all, and the nobles found it easier to accept a male king than a woman, no matter what they had promised. Sound familiar? In King Viserys, the first names Rhaenyra his heir, and the lords of Westeros swear to her. But upon his death, the whispers begin. Alicent Hightower, the queen, argues that a woman's place is not on the throne. Her son Aegon II is crowned. The Greens claim that the oaths were made under duress, that the law of the land favours a male heir. It's the same betrayal, separated by centuries and filtered through dragonfire. The direct character link between Matilda and Rhaenyra is almost frighteningly clear. Both women were raised to rule. Both were educated and politically savvy, and both were denied their birthright because of their gender. Matilda fought back, leading a brutal civil war that lasted nearly 2 decades. Rhaenyra does the same, rallying the blacks against the greens. But here's where the fiction takes its own turn. Dragons. Matilda never had a flying furnace at her command. Rhaenyra does, and that changes the calculus of the war, but not the core tragedy. The tragedy is that both women were judged not by their competence, but by their bodies. The nobility of England and Westeros alike saw a female ruler as a weakness, an aberration, and in both cases, the men who broke their oaths did so because they believed a woman could not keep the realm stable. It's a bitter irony that the chaos they feared would come from a woman's rule was instead unleashed by their own rebellion. Now consider Alicent Hightower and Aegon II as the fictional counterparts to Stephen of Blois. Stephen was not a villain in the traditional sense. He was a man who believed he had a legitimate claim. His mother Adela was a daughter of William the Conqueror, and Stephen saw himself as the rightful heir. Similarly, Alicent pushes her son Aegon forward not out of pure malice, but out of a twisted sense of duty. She believes that the realm will be more stable under a male king, and she fears what will happen if Rhaenyra takes the throne with Daemon at her side. Stephen's supporters in England were motivated by similar fears. A woman ruling meant uncertainty, and in a world where power was tied to martial strength, a queen could not lead armies into battle. Stephen could. Aegon could not ride a dragon as effectively as Rhaenyra, but he was a man, and that was enough for the Greens. The shared themes of gender politics and broken oaths are the backbone of both histories. In the English Anarchy, the oaths sworn to Matilda were shattered within weeks of Henry's death. In Westeros, the oaths sworn to Rhaenyra are broken the moment Viserys' body grows cold. The pattern is the same. A king names his daughter his heir, the nobles swear fealty, and then they choose a man as soon as the king is gone. It's a pattern that reveals the deep-seated misogyny of medieval society. Martin did not invent this. He observed it in the historical record and transposed it onto his fictional world. And the tragedy of Rhaenyra is that she knows what happened to Matilda. She knows that history is a wheel that crushes those who try to resist it. Yet she fights anyway, because the alternative is to accept that a woman's word means nothing. There's a moment in both stories that captures this perfectly. When Matilda was captured in Oxford during a harsh winter, she had to escape by being lowered from a castle window in the snow, dressed in white as camouflage. It's a desperate, humiliating flight. Rhaenyra faces similar humiliations. Her allies betray her, her own half-brother usurps her, and she is forced to flee King's Landing while her children are threatened. These are not just plot points. They are the lived experience of a woman fighting a system that was built to exclude her, and the men who oppose her, whether Stephen of Blois or Aegon II, are not monsters. They are ordinary men who benefit from the patriarchy and who feel righteous in their claim. That makes the conflict all the more devastating. It's not good versus evil. It's a clash of oaths and ambitions, where the only real crime is being born female in a world that worships male heirs. So when you watch Rhaenyra demand the throne that was promised to her, you are watching a ghost from the 12th century. You are watching Empress Matilda, denied, defiant, and ultimately tragic. The Dance of the Dragons is not just a fantasy war. It is a mirror held up to our own history, a reminder that the oaths we swear can be broken by the very people who swore them. And that brings us to another war, one that would tear England apart. A few centuries later, a war that gave Martin the framework for the Starks and the Lannisters. That war is known as the Wars of the Roses. And in the next chapter, we will see how the red and white roses of Lancaster and York bloom into the bloodiest conflict of medieval England, and how those same petals fall on the battlefields of Westeros. You won't want to miss it. And so we move from the anarchy of the 12th century to a later, even more famous English Civil War, one that has become the blueprint for the entire central conflict of. I'm talking, of course, about the Wars of the Roses. If the Dance of the Dragons gave its brutal family feud, it was the Wars of the Roses that gave the Starks and the Lannisters their blood feud. And just like the black and the green factions sprang from a single dynasty, these real-world houses were branches of the same royal tree. The Wars of the Roses were a series of civil wars fought in England between 1455 and 1487. The two main contenders were the House of Lancaster, symbolised by a red rose, and the House of York, symbolised by a white rose. George R. Martin has acknowledged this inspiration many times, and the parallels run deep. The Starks, with their northern loyalty and sombre honour, map onto the Yorkists, who claimed the throne through a strong line of descent and whose sigil is that white rose. The Lannisters, with their wealth, political cunning and southern power base, map onto the Lancastrians and their red rose. But here is the twist that makes the whole conflict so poignant. Both houses were descended from King Edward III. They were cousins, sharing the same bloodline, just like the Starks and Lannisters are distantly related through the Targaryen intermarriages and the great houses of Westeros. The war was not a clash of strangers. It was a family feud writ large across a kingdom. Think about that for a moment. In the real world, the white rose and the red rose were plucked from the same garden. Edward III had many children, and those children produced rival lines. The Lancasters came from John of Gaunt, the third surviving son. The Yorks came from Edmund of Langley, the fourth son, and also from Lionel of Antwerp, the second son, through a female line. That tangled web of claims and counterclaim mirrors the very succession crisis that drives, and Martin took that core idea, a dynasty splitting into two warring branches, and expanded it into the Stark-Lannister enmity. But the Wars of the Roses is not just a simple one-to-one map. The Starks are not literally the Yorks. They are the northern, morally grounded underdogs. The Lannisters are not literally the Lancasters. They are the rich, ruthless southern courtiers. Yet the symbolism of the roses is unmistakable. Winterfell's sigil is a direwolf, not a rose, but the association with white, the colour of the North's snows, ties back to the white rose of York, and the Lannisters' red evokes both the red rose of Lancaster and the blood they spill so freely. Perhaps the most telling parallel is the fate of the real houses. The Wars of the Roses ended when Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian claimant, defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Henry then married Elizabeth of York, uniting the two roses into the Tudor rose, a combined red and white flower. Did Martin give us a similar union? In a way, yes. Jon Snow, a Stark by blood and a Targaryen by birth, and Daenerys, the last dragon, represent a merging of ice and fire. But that merger, as we know, ended in tragedy, not a peaceful Tudor-style settlement. Martin loves to subvert expectations. And now, before we move deeper into the real-world events that inspired the most shocking moment in all of, I want you to keep that image of the two roses in your mind, because our next chapter takes us from the broad fields of the Wars of the Roses to a dark hall in Scotland, where a dinner turned into a massacre. That event, combined with another Highland betrayal, gave birth to the Red Wedding. I'll tell you the full story of the Black Dinner and the massacre of Glencoe in Chapter 18. The real Red Wedding. But for tonight, rest with the knowledge that even the most fantastic conflicts are rooted in the bloody, beautiful history of our own world. If the Wars of the Roses gave House Lannister their red roses and House Stark their white direwolf banners, the true soul of Westeros, the thing that makes it feel so unsafe, so relentlessly political, comes from a different tradition entirely. The Wars of the Roses were a series of pitched battles and shifting allegiances, but the Red Wedding, the moment the entire world of Game of Thrones shifted on its axis, did not take its inspiration from a battlefield. It took its inspiration from a banquet table and a hearth fire. Martin looked to the brutal history of Scotland for that. The Black Dinner of 1440. The year is 1440. Scotland is in a precarious state, with a child king on the throne, James II. The most powerful family in the land is the Black Douglases. They are effectively within a kingdom. The regents of the young king decide that the Douglases are too powerful. They invite the young Earl of Douglas, William, and his brother David to Edinburgh Castle for a dinner of reconciliation. A great feast is laid out. The king and the earl feast together, and then, at the height of the celebration, a black bull's head is brought into the hall and placed before the earl. In the culture of the time, there was no greater symbol of doom. It was a death sentence. The young king, perhaps unwilling, perhaps a puppet, begged for the Douglases' lives, but it was too late. The Douglases were dragged from the king's table, taken to the courtyard of Edinburgh Castle, and beheaded. The betrayal of the Douglas clan was absolute. They came as guests. They died as traitors, framed by the very hospitality that was supposed to protect them. This is the skeleton of the Red Wedding, the feast, the symbol, the slaughter. But Martin did not stop with one event. He layered a second, perhaps even darker, Scottish crime on top of the first. The massacre of Glencoe in 1692. This time the violation was even deeper. The law of hospitality is a sacred thing in Scotland, known as the law of the guest. In Glencoe, the Clan MacDonald hosted soldiers from the Campbell clan, under the command of Captain Robert Campbell, for 12 days. The MacDonalds shared their food, their homes, their hearth with these men. These were not just soldiers. They were acting on orders. An order to put all to the sword under 70. The Campbells waited until the dead of night. They turned on their hosts. They murdered the Macian, the chief, as he tried to rise from bed. They killed women. They killed children. They burned the homes they had slept in. The violation of hospitality laws was so profound that it haunted the political reputation of the British government for centuries. It was known as murder under trust. To break bread with a man and then kill him was not just war, it was an insult to God and nature. This is the deep well of cynicism that informs the Targaryen civil war. When you watch the Dance of the Dragons, you are watching a conflict where the sacred bonds of family and guest right are constantly, deliberately shattered. The Blacks and the Greens are not leading armies against monsters. They are frequently monsters to each other. They plot inside the Red Keep. They poison, they betray, they scheme. The history of the Dance of the Dragons feels so brutally real because Martin understood that the highest stakes are not who wins the throne, but how utterly the game corrupts the rules of humanity. The Red Wedding was a single event. The Dance of the Dragons is a war built on the philosophy of the Black Dinner and Glencoe. It is a war where nothing is sacred. The reason these historical parallels feel so rich is that George R.R. Martin is a historian at heart, masquerading as a fantasy novelist. He has an insatiable appetite for digging into the darkest corners of our own world. And as he built this world, layer by layer, he found himself creating an entire fictional history book to explain it all. He wrote Fire and Blood, the book that gave us House of the Dragon, but he wrote it, in his own way, against a deadline he set for himself that never quite came. The story of how he avoided the main plot to write the history is a uniquely fascinating tale of creative distraction, which perfectly sets up the subject of our next chapter. The procrastination of Fire and Blood. The Scottish Highlands gave us the Black Dinner and the Massacre of Glencoe, two bloody inspirations that Martin reshaped into the Red Wedding. But the author who so skillfully mined real history for cruelty also has a history of his own, a history of procrastination that has become almost as legendary as the stories themselves. And nowhere is that clearer than in the strange winding path that led to the creation of the Targaryen dynasty's fictional history, a book called, you see, George R.R. Martin is a gardener, not an architect. He plants seeds of story and watches them grow, often in directions he never anticipated. But gardens need tending, and sometimes the gardener gets distracted by a particularly fascinating patch of soil. For Martin, that patch was the Targaryens, the family of dragon lords, with their silver hair and their incestuous bloodlines, their fiery conquests and their slow, tragic decline. They captivated him, and what started as a few pages of backstory for slowly, inexorably, became a sprawling history book all its own. He wrote as a mock history, a faux medieval chronicle penned by the fictional Maester Archmaester Gildane. It was supposed to be a companion piece, a way to flesh out the world for fans who wanted more than the main novels could provide. But the book grew and grew, and as it grew, it consumed time that might have gone to finishing. The irony is almost painful. The same love of detail and depth that makes Martin's world so immersive also became the very thing that stalled its central narrative. He became, in his own words, a procrastinator of Fire and Blood. The transition from that fake history text to a high-budget television drama was not a straight line. When HBO approached Martin about a prequel, the obvious choice was the Dance of the Dragons, the civil war that tore the Targaryen house apart. But to adapt that story, they needed source material, and Martin had only given them a fraction of it in. So he returned to the well, writing more and more about the Targaryen lineage, fleshing out the reigns of kings, the betrayals of queens, the births and deaths of dragons. The fake history became a real blueprint for a show, and Martin, as a creator, found himself more comfortable in that genealogical garden than in the thorny thicket of the main series. The Targaryens were his own creation, fully under his control, untainted by the expectations of millions. He could invent a new dragon battle, a new betrayal, a new piece of lore, and it felt like play. Meanwhile, the Starks and Lannisters waited in the wings, their fates still unwritten. It's a strange kind of artistic avoidance, one that gave us, but at the cost of the very story that made us love this world in the first place. So the question lingers. What is it about the Targaryens that draws him so powerfully? Perhaps it's the tragedy of their fall, the way a dynasty that once commanded the skies could crumble into ruin. Or perhaps it's the mystery of their origins, the secrets of Valyria that no one fully understands. That mystery takes us to a prophecy, a dream that saved a house and set a timeline in motion. And that story, the story of a girl who saw the doom of Valyria 12 years before it happened, is the subject of our next chapter, the 12-year prophecy. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, Make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The previous chapter explored how George R. Martin's own creative detour, writing the fictional history, became a kind of procrastination that deepened the world rather than advancing the main story. But that detour revealed something far stranger and more precise than anyone expected. A recurring numerical motif buried in Targaryen history. A pattern that feels less like coincidence and more like the fingerprint of prophecy itself. 12 years. That number echoes through the Targaryen timeline like a heartbeat. When Lord Aegon Targaryen heeded the warning of his daughter Daenys the Dreamer and moved his entire house from Valyria to Dragonstone, he did so exactly 12 years before the Doom consumed the freehold. Not 11, not 13, 12. And that precision is not an accident. It is the first thread in a tapestry, woven with deliberate, almost obsessive symmetry. Daenys' prophecy was not a vague premonition of doom. It was a specific, calculated warning. She saw the 14 fires erupt, saw the peninsula shatter, saw the dragons of Valyria burn in a catastrophe that would reshape the world, and she gave her father a timeline. 12 years. That number gave House Targaryen enough time to secure their new home, to stockpile resources, to ensure their bloodlines survived the coming apocalypse. But it also created a psychological weight that would echo through generations. Think about what that means for a family that prides itself on dragon blood and prophetic dreams. The Targaryens didn't just escape the doom. They escaped it with a countdown. Every year that passed, every season that turned, was a reminder that their survival was not luck, but design. And that design came from a girl who dreamed of fire and ash. Now, here's where the pattern becomes eerie. The Targaryen flight to Dragonstone happened in 114 BC. The Doom struck in 102 BC. That 12-year gap is the first instance of a motif that appears again and again in their history. Consider the reign of Aegon the Conqueror. He began his conquest of Westeros in 2 BC, and by 1 AC he had forged the Iron Throne. But the true consolidation of power took 12 years, from the submission of the last independent kingdom to the establishment of a unified realm under Targaryen rule. 12 years to transform a prophecy into a kingdom. Then look at the Dance of the Dragons. The civil war that tore the Targaryens apart began in 129 AC and ended in 131 AC. That's 2 years of open conflict, but the seeds were sown much earlier. The Great Council of 101 AC, which decided the succession, set the stage for the war. From that council to the outbreak of war, 12 years. From the death of King Viserys I to the final resolution, 12 years again, if you count the regency that followed. But the most chilling example comes from the Doom itself. The prophecy that Daenys received was not just about the destruction of Valyria. It was about the Targaryen destiny. She saw that her family would survive the Doom, but she also saw that they would one day face another cataclysm, one that would test their bloodline to its breaking point, and that prophecy too came with a 12-year countdown. Consider the timeline of the main series. Daenerys Targaryen was born in 284 AC. The War of the Five Kings began in 298 AC. That's 14 years, not 12. But look closer. Daenerys' birth marked the end of the Targaryen dynasty in Westeros. The last dragon was born, and then the line went dormant. The prophecy of the prince that was promised, the one who would bring the dawn, was tied to a specific timeline. Melisandre believed Stannis Baratheon was the prince, but she was wrong. The true prince, or princess, was Daenerys. And a journey from exile to conquest took exactly 12 years from the death of her father, the Mad King, to her arrival at Dragonstone in 298 AC. That's the recurring motif, 12 years. The Targaryen history is structured around this number like a spine. The flight from Valyria, the conquest of Westeros, the dance of the dragons, the fall of the dynasty, all of them orbit this 12-year cycle. It's as if the family is bound by a cosmic clock ticking toward moments of transformation or destruction. And the precision of Daenys' prophecy is what makes this so chilling. She didn't just say someday, she said 12 years. That level of specificity implies that the Targaryens, with their dragon dreams and their blood magic, understood time in a way we don't. They saw the future as a pattern, a rhythm, a song with a repeating chorus. The 12-year gap is that chorus. Now, think about the weight of that on the characters in Rhaenyra, Viserys, Daemon. They all grew up knowing that their family's history is punctuated by these 12-year intervals. The Doom, the Conquest, the Dance, each one a turning point that reshaped the world, and they are living through another one. The show begins in 112 AC, 12 years before the Dance of the Dragons begins in 124 AC. That's not a coincidence. The writers deliberately placed the start of the story 12 years before the war, mirroring Daenys' own 12-year warning. This creates a profound sense of inevitability. The characters are not just making choices, they are walking a path laid out centuries before. Every decision, every betrayal, every dragon battle feels like a step in a dance that was choreographed before they were born, and the audience feels it too. We know that the war is coming, that the dragons will fight, that the Targaryen dynasty will fracture, but the characters don't. They think they are forging their own destiny, but they are actually fulfilling a prophecy. This is the genius of the storytelling. The 12-year motif gives the history a sense of fate, of cosmic order. It makes the Targaryens feel like a famously cursed by their own bloodline, doomed to repeat the same mistakes every 12 years. And it makes the Doom of Valyria feel not like a random disaster, but like a punishment for hubris, a warning that the Targaryens ignored until it was too late. But here's the thing, the prophecy doesn't just apply to the past, it applies to the future as well. Daenys saw the Doom, but she also saw the return of the dragons, the rise of Daenerys, and the final battle against the darkness. And that prophecy too is tied to a 12-year cycle. From the birth of Daenerys to the start of the War of the Five Kings, 12 years. From the death of the last dragon to the hatching of Daenerys' eggs, 12 years. From the dance of the dragons to the fall of the Targaryens, 12 years. The pattern is relentless. It's as if the Targaryens are trapped in a 12-year loop, a cycle of rise and fall, creation and destruction. And the characters in are living through the most critical part of that cycle. They don't know it, but they are the ones who will either break the cycle or doom their family to repeat it forever. This is why the weight of the past is so heavy on them. Every Targaryen knows that their family's history is written in blood and fire. They know that the doom came because of hubris, because the Valyrians thought they were gods, and they know that the Dance of the Dragons came because of a succession crisis, because the family turned on itself. But they don't know that the pattern is repeating. They don't see that they are walking the same path as their ancestors. Take Rhaenyra. She is a direct descendant of Daenys the Dreamer. She carries the same blood, the same prophetic gift, and she is facing the same choice. Trust the prophecy or ignore it. When she claims the throne, she is not just fighting for her birthright. She is fulfilling a destiny that was written 12 years before her birth. The Greens too are part of this pattern. Aegon too is crowned 12 years after the Great Council of 101 AC, which itself was 12 years after the death of King Jaehaerys. The numbers align, the stars align, the history aligns. And then there is Daemon. He is the wild card, the dragon who flies against the current. But even he is bound by the 12-year cycle. His exile, his return, his marriage to Rhaenyra. All of these events fall within the pattern. He is a man who thinks he can escape fate, but he is just another thread in the tapestry. The showrunners understood this. They built the narrative around this temporal symmetry. The opening scene of is set in 101 AC, 12 years before the war begins. The first episode jumps forward to 112 AC, another 12-year leap. The pacing of the show mirrors the pacing of the prophecy. It's a subtle touch, but it reinforces the idea that time is a circle, not a line. And this brings us to the most haunting aspect of the 12-year motif, the Doom of Valyria. Daenys' prophecy was not just about the destruction of her homeland, it was about the survival of her bloodline. She knew that the Targaryens would be the last dragon lords, that they would carry the legacy of Valyria into a new world, and she knew that they would face another doom. Not a volcanic eruption, but a civil war that would tear them apart. The Dance of the Dragons is that second doom. It is the fulfillment of the prophecy, the 12-year countdown reaching its end, and the characters are powerless to stop it. They are caught in the current of history, swept along by a force they cannot see. This is why the show feels so tragic. Every character is a victim of fate. Rhaenyra, Aegon took, Daemon, Alicent. They all believe they are making choices, but they are actually following a script written centuries before. The 12-year gap is the hand of destiny, guiding them toward their doom. And yet, there is a glimmer of hope. The prophecy of Daenys was not just about destruction, it was also about renewal. The Targaryens survived the doom, and they will survive the dance. The dragons will return, and the cycle will begin again. But that is a story for another time. Now, let's step back and look at the human element. The 12-year motif is not just a narrative device. It is a reflection of the Targaryen obsession with time, legacy, with the weight of history. Every Targaryen is born knowing that their family has a destiny, that they are part of a grand design, and that knowledge is both a blessing and a curse. It gives them purpose, but it also traps them in a cage of expectation. Think about Viserys. He is a king who knows the prophecy, who knows that his family is on the brink of collapse. He tries to hold the realm together, but he is fighting against time itself. His reign is defined by the 12-year cycle, the 12 years between the Great Council and the dance, the 12 years between his marriage to Alicent and his death. He is a man who is trying to outrun fate, but fate is always faster. And then there is Rhaenyra. She is the heir, the chosen one, the dragon rider who was meant to break the cycle. But she is also a woman in a patriarchal world, a mother who loses her children, a queen who is betrayed by her own family. Her story is a tragedy, but it is also a prophecy fulfilled. She is the princess who was promised, but the promise was a curse. The 12-year gap is not just a timeline. It is a reminder that history repeats itself. The Targaryens are a family that cannot escape their own mythology. They are doomed to relive their greatest triumphs and their greatest failures over and over again until the end of time. And that is the weight of the past on the characters of. They are not just fighting for a throne. They are fighting against the ghost of Daenys the Dreamer, against the prophecy that has haunted their family for centuries. Every choice they make is a step toward either breaking the cycle or perpetuating it. So when you watch the show, pay attention to the numbers. Notice the 12-year gaps. They are not just coincidences. They are the heartbeat of the Targaryen story. And they remind us that in this world, the past is never truly past. It is always waiting, just 12 years away. Now, let's turn to a different kind of prophecy, the kind that comes not from dreams, but from casting. The role of young Rhaenyra was given to Millie Alcock, a then unknown actress who would go on to captivate audiences with her fierce portrayal. But her journey to that role is a story in itself, one that reveals the hidden machinery of Hollywood and the strange twists of fate that can change a life forever. That story is coming up next in Chapter 21. Millie Alcock's discovery, that 12-year countdown, the precise nature of the prophecy that saved the Targaryen line, reveals how deeply the concept of fate and destined individuals runs through this world. But fate doesn't just guide dynasties across centuries. Sometimes, it finds a single person at exactly the right moment, pulling them from complete obscurity into the path of a dragon. Of course, not every prophecy is written in the flames of Old Valyria. Some are just written in the margins of a casting call, waiting for the right face to step out of the crowd. Which brings us to the story of how a young Australian actress, barely out of high school, became the vessel for one of the most crucial roles in the entire franchise, the discovery of Millie Alcock. Millie Alcock was just 10 years old when Game of Thrones first aired. She didn't watch it. It wasn't a show for her, not at that age. She grew up in Sydney with a love for acting, doing school plays and local theatre. The massive cultural phenomenon of Westeros was just a distant rumour in her household, something the adults talked about. She had no connection to the world of dragons and Iron Thrones at all. Fast forward to the casting of House of the Dragon. The producers were searching for the young version of Rhaenyra Targaryen, a character who embodies the proud, fiery spirit of the old Valyrian bloodline. Millie Alcock was 18 years old when she auditioned. She hadn't seen the source material. She didn't know the history of the Dance of the Dragons. Her entire understanding of the role came purely from the scripts and the direction she was given. This blank slate became her greatest asset. She wasn't trying to imitate an existing portrayal or carry the weight of a pre-existing fan expectation. She was building Rhaenyra from the ground up, based entirely on the text of Fire and Blood and the vision of the showrunners. One moment, she's a drama student in Sydney. The next, she's on the set of the most anticipated television premiere of the decade. The pressure of being the face of a billion-dollar franchise, the heir to the Iron Throne, was immense. But she didn't have the preconditioned fear that a fan might have had. She simply did the work. That fresh perspective is what defined her performance. Young Rhaenyra is fierce, entitled, intelligent, and desperately in need of validation from a father who is preoccupied with duty. Millie played her not as a tragic figure waiting to happen, but as a vibrant, reckless force of nature. She brought a modern sensibility to the role without breaking the period. You could see the dragon in her eyes before she ever mounted Syrax. That confidence, that unshakable belief in her own birthright, wasn't something she learned from the books. It was something she discovered in the rehearsal room. Her chemistry with Olivia Cook and Matt Smith was entirely organic. The directors, Miguel Sapochnik and Greg Yataines, intentionally kept her separated from Emma Darcy, who played the older Rhaenyra. This was to ensure that Millie's version wasn't shadowed by the performance of her future self. Millie's Rhaenyra is a completely independent creation, a snapshot of a princess before the world hardened her. The first 5 episodes of House of the Dragon belong entirely to Millie Alcock. She carries the emotional weight of the narrative, from the arrogant joy of the tourney to the devastating heartbreak of episode 7, when she learns her father is dead and her throne has been stolen. That scene, where she walks through the Red Keep, her face a mask of controlled rage, her eyes just raw and broken. It was the moment the audience collectively knew they were watching something special. Critics universally praised her performance. The show became an instant hit, allowing the franchise to rise from the ashes of a divisive ending. And a huge part of that is because Millie Alcock made viewers fall in love with Rhaenyra in her youth. When she transitions out of the role and Emma Darcy takes over, it works perfectly because Millie established such a strong foundation. The pain is already there. The defiance is already baked in. A final scene, placing the crown on her head with such trembling resolve, is a masterclass in character handoff. The world had discovered a major new talent. Overnight, Millie Alcock became a household name for fantasy fans, and it all started with a girl who hadn't even seen the show that made her famous. Her lack of knowledge, her lack of baggage, was the very thing that allowed her to become the definitive young Rhaenyra. That debut, that explosion of talent, didn't happen in a vacuum. It resonated across the industry. The premiere of House of the Dragon wasn't just a success. It was a seismic event in television history. The numbers it pulled in completely shattered expectations, proving that the world hadn't tired of Westeros at all. This brings us directly to Chapter 22, breaking HBO records. The journey of the show from a divisive legacy to the single most watched premiere in the history of premium cable is a story of pure, unstoppable momentum. And it starts with the exact moment those first episodes aired, and the millions of screens that lit up across the world, waiting to see what new story the dragons would tell. Here was a young actress stepping into a role that required her to embody the very soul of Targaryen ambition. A transition that mirrored the show's own journey. Millie Alcock, who had been only 10 years old when Game of Thrones first aired, was discovering a world that a global audience already carried deep in their bones. But she was far from the only one entering an arena where the stakes could not have been higher. The entire production of House of the Dragon was acutely aware of the monumental expectations placed upon it. This was not a simple spin-off. This was a return to Westeros, and the shadow of what had come before was immense. When Game of Thrones concluded in 2019, the cultural landscape it left behind was deeply fractured. The series finale had ignited a firestorm of disappointment among a significant portion of the fanbase. It was not a minor disagreement over creative choices. It was a seismic cultural argument that played out across every corner of the internet. For years, the show had been an undisputed titan of television, but its departure was marred by accusations of rushed storytelling and character arcs that felt severely betrayed. This was the legacy the new show had to contend with. The idea of returning to that universe was not a guaranteed victory. It was a gamble of the highest order, a gamble against the tide of public sentiment. Predictions of a disastrous reception were common. Some wondered if the brand had been irreparably damaged. Could a prequel, set roughly 200 years before the main series, focusing on a different generation of Targaryens, possibly recapture the magic, or would it be a painful reminder of what had been lost? Yet the creative team believed they had a story grounded in the dense, rich history of fire and blood, a story about the beginning of the end. Then came the night of August 21st, 2022. The premiere aired, and the entire industry held its breath. The result was a thunderclap. Approximately 10 million viewers tuned in for the live premiere, a number that was staggering on its own, but was merely the opening salvo. Within the first 5 days, that number had doubled. 20 million viewers had flocked to the show, making House of the Dragon not just a hit, but the most watched series premiere in HBO's entire history. This was a statement. It defied the expectations rooted in the divisive conclusion of its predecessor. It proved the audience was willing to forgive, to move forward, and to embrace this world once more. The 10 million viewers on that first night represented a cultural re-engagement. They proved that the connection a massive audience felt was stronger than the bitterness of its final episode. It was a triumph over legacy. The impact of these debut numbers ricocheted through the entire entertainment industry. It instantly validated HBO's massive investment and strategy, effectively silencing the years of skepticism that had clouded the project. It sent a clear signal to every studio executive. Prequels and spin-offs, when handled with reverence and genuine quality, could be massive draws. This was not a nostalgia play. House of the Dragon established its own identity, its own distinct aesthetic, while feeling completely consonant with the brutal, beautiful world it originated from. The massive viewership proved there was an enormous appetite for the lore, the history, the deep political intrigue. It was a masterclass in brand recovery. But a single night of triumph, a single broken record, does not sustain a franchise. The real challenge was what happened in the weeks that followed. Would the audience stay, or was this merely a curiosity spike born from the controversy of the finale? The answer, as the sustained viewership and cultural saturation would demonstrate, was that the premiere was not the peak. It was the ignition point. The story of House of the Dragon was just beginning to unfold, and the way it captured the imagination of the entire planet, turning Sunday nights into a global appointment once again, marked the true arrival of the series. The broken records were the introduction. What the world witnessed next was the slow, steady, and utterly dominant emergence of a genuine global phenomenon. The 10 million viewer premiere was a declaration. It was a statement from a wounded audience that they were willing to trust this world again, to step back into the fire. But a premiere night is a single heartbeat in a much larger organism. The true test of a brand discarded by expectation was whether that audience would stay, whether the world would lean in for the long haul, and it did. In the 5 days following its debut, House of the Dragon reached 20 million viewers. This was not simply a successful launch, it was a cultural validation. It proved that the dismissal of the franchise had been premature. The international scale of the show's audience and cultural footprint was staggering in its immediacy. The original series had taken years to conquer the global consciousness, building its empire season by season. House of the Dragon arrived already seated on the throne. Conversations about succession, about the nature of prophecy, about the price of dragonfire, erupted simultaneously in every time zone. The Targaryen sigil became a universal symbol once more, plastered across billboards in cities that had never even seen snow. It became a shared language, a common text that millions of people were reading at the exact same moment. This massive wave of viewership and conversation effectively cemented the Game of Thrones brand as a long-term franchise. For years after the finale, the industry had debated whether the property was toxic, whether its legacy had been fatally poisoned. The 5-day explosion of 20 million viewers answered that question definitively. Westeros was no longer a single story with a controversial ending. It had been transformed into a historical saga. The brand was not a limited series. It was a library. It was a universe. Audiences proved they were hungry, not just for nostalgia, but for the depth of the lore itself. Naturally, the shadow of the original series loomed over every review. The critical reception compared to the original series was intense and revealing. Many noted that House of the Dragon lacked the sheer shock value of the Red Wedding or the brutal narrative bait and switch of the early seasons. It traded that shock for a different kind of weight. Critics argued that it was a return to the slow-burning political realism of the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, before the story outran its source material. It was praised for taking its time, for trusting its audience to endure the dense Shakespearean tragedy of a family tearing itself apart. It was not trying to be bigger, it was trying to be deeper, and for the vast majority of viewers, it succeeded. To pull off this level of global immersion, to make 20 million people believe they were watching the living history of a dynasty, the production had to perform a kind of magic trick. What we saw on screen was majesty. What the actors experienced on set was something far more mechanical, far more grueling. The dragons that dominated the cultural conversation were not real creatures. The wind in the actress's hair was not natural. The gravity of riding a beast into battle was performed on contraptions that looked nothing like the finished product. To understand the full scope of this global phenomenon, you have to understand the physical sacrifice that created it. This is the untold reality behind the spectacle, and it brings us directly into the experience of riding the mechanical dragon. And that massive audience, almost instantly invested in this sprawling civil war, was watching a story that required a radical reinvention of how its most central element was brought to life: the dragons themselves. Chapter 24, Riding the Mechanical Dragon. You cannot fake the physical weight of a dragon rider. When we talk about the massive audience embracing House of the Dragon, we have to understand what those 20 million viewers were actually seeing on screen. It was an alchemy of performance, light, engineering, and sheer actor endurance. The dragons, those living weapons of the Targaryen dynasty, are not just visual effects, they are physical presences. The crew had to create a reality for the actors that mirrored the intense, terrifying, and exhilarating experience of controlling a creature the size of a jumbo jet. The primary tool for this was not a green screen. It was a complex mechanical rig. Think of it less like a carnival ride and more like a bucking bull designed by an aerospace engineer. These rigs were hydraulic, capable of pitching, rolling, and violently shaking the actor to mimic the unpredictable flight path of a dragon. But to sell the illusion, it was not enough to just bounce the actor around. You needed the environment. The moment an actor settled into that saddle on set, the magic was supplemented by brute force technology. Industrial leaf blowers were set to full power, creating gale force winds that battered their faces and tore at their costumes, giving the illusion of rushing through the sky at 100 miles an hour. If the scene called for a storm, rain machines would soak them to the bone, creating a brutal, wet, heavy misery that the camera could capture. The actors were not just acting cold and battered, they were cold and battered. The physical demands placed on the cast were immense. Matt Smith, Millie Alcock, Emma Darcy, they all endured intense stunt rehearsals and long days strapped into these metal beasts, holding a posture that looks commanding while being violently shaken, blasted with grit and wind, and trying to perfectly pronounce high Valyrian dialogue requires a core strength that rivals a professional athlete. It is a sport. The throne of the Dragon Rider is earned in that rig. The director, Miguel Sapochnik, famously wanted the dragons to feel heavy, to have a physical weight and gravity. That gravity transfers directly into the bodies of the actors, creating a tension in their shoulders and a strain in their hands that the camera reads immediately. It is an exhausting process, but that exhaustion translates perfectly to the screen. This hybrid approach marks a fascinating evolution in the depiction of dragons on screen. Go back to the first season of Game of Thrones. Daenerys' dragons were practically puppets in some cases, but mostly nascent computer-generated imagery. By the final season, they were fully digital marvels. But House of the Dragon took a step back, or rather, a step forward, by integrating a higher level of sophisticated practical staging. The mechanical rigs are a modern extension of this craft. They allow the lighting team to work with the actor's actual skin, catching the firelight of Syrax or Vargar in their eyes. The CGI artists then take that perfectly lit, wind-whipped actor and they wrap the digital dragon body around them. The animation of the dragon itself is also more grounded. The show used horse and eagle locomotion as references to give the dragons a more organic, animalistic movement. The wing flaps are powerful, the landings are heavy. The turns bank with aerodynamic physics that feel real because they are built on a foundation of practical simulation. The digital beast becomes an extension of the actor's physical struggle. This meticulous attention to the physical reality of the world is a hallmark of the show's production philosophy. Every choice, from the weight of the Iron Throne to the shudder of the dragon rig, was made to ground Targaryen power in a tangible, exhausting reality. And this level of detail is reflected in the very architecture of the story itself. The decision to confine this sprawling, multi-generational conflict to a single tightly constructed block of episodes created a specific narrative pressure. The first season was crafted not as an endless saga, but as a deliberate 10-episode structure designed to launch the war. Every moment in that season had to earn its place. Every scene was a brick in the wall of the succession crisis. Next, in Chapter 25, the 10-episode structure, we will pull back the curtain to see how the writers and producers mapped this entire brutal war onto a framework that felt epic yet intimate, establishing the rules of engagement for the entire series to come. But for now, let the image of those mechanical rigs dissolve. Let the wind and the rain fade into the quiet hum of a peaceful night. Those mechanical contraptions, puffing smoke and shuddering under the weight of the cast, were more than just special effects props. They were the crucible where the performances were forged. But the real crucible of House of the Dragon's first season wasn't physical, it was structural. It was a gamble with time itself. Game of Thrones, by its very nature, was a sprawling epic that moved with the seasons. A journey north, a tournament, a betrayal. It took its time building a single cohesive narrative thread over a single year. House of the Dragon, telling the story of an entire dynasty's collapse, couldn't afford that luxury. Its pacing had to be ruthless, focused, and utterly confident in the choices it was making. The showrunners made a deliberate bet. They didn't just tell a story about a war. They told the story of how that war became inevitable. And to do that, The first season had to leap across decades. It allowed the show to cover vast swathes of history. They moved through time in strategic jumps, with specific gaps between major events. 10 years here, 3 years there. It was a gamble that took a lot of discussion, but the design was intentional. You need to see Rhaenyra as a reckless teenager, and then as a defiant adult. You need to see Alicent as a scared girl, and then as a calculating queen. The time jumps weren't just narrative shortcuts. They were the entire point of a prequel that dares to build its own mythology. They let the tension simmer for decades in the space of a single episode, forcing the audience to sit with the consequences. This is what truly sets the season apart. We spend almost the entire runtime in peacetime, in the quiet before the storm. The show explicitly decided to focus on character development before the war begins. It chose to make us intimately familiar with the fractures, a slight here, a rumour there, a king's failing health, an arranged marriage, a petty look in a wheelhouse. We watch the cracks form in the dynasty over decades. It is not just a battle of swords and dragons. It is a battle of wills, of grief, of ambition, and of love. Every character is given the space to become who they need to be. This allows the eventual violence, when it does arrive in the back half of the season, to land with devastating emotional weight. We aren't seeing strangers fight. We are seeing family. And this reveals a profound structural difference between House of the Dragon and the original series. Game of Thrones was an intricate web of many houses, many plots, many points of view. It was a democracy of narrative focus. House of the Dragon is a monarchy of narrative. It focuses almost solely on the Targaryens and their inner circle. It is tighter, more claustrophobic. The tragedy isn't spread across a continent. It is contained within the Red Keep. In Game of Thrones, the conflict was often external. Starks versus Lannisters, the living versus the dead. In House of the Dragon, the world is smaller, but the stakes are absolute. The threat isn't an army coming over the wall. The threat is sitting on the Iron Throne, or standing right next to it. It is a story of absolute power and absolute corruption, seen entirely from the inside. The pacing reflects this. It is a slow burn, but the heat is always there, pressing against the walls of the throne room. So this 10-episode season covers the fall of a dynasty, and it places us at a very specific moment in that timeline. We are watching the rot set in a long, long time before a certain silver-haired queen is born in a storm, which brings us to the truly staggering scale of this timeline. The events we are so intimately entrenched in, they are still almost 2 centuries removed from the world we thought we knew. Understanding the vastness of that gap, from the Dance of the Dragons to the barefoot girl walking into a fire, that is the true measure of the fall. And that gulf, that 170-year gap, is not just empty space on a calendar. It is a haunted landscape, filled with the ghosts of the legacy we are watching collapse right now. It changes everything you think you know about what is to come. And so the first season of House of the Dragon ends with a funeral, a crown, and a dragon's shadow, falling over a continent that has not yet realised it is about to tear itself apart. 10 episodes spanning decades, compressing entire lives into a few hours of screen time. But here's the thing about time in this world. It moves differently for dragons. A dragon can live for 200 years, sometimes longer. Vargar, the oldest living dragon at the start of the show, was born during the Conquest itself, a century and a half before the dance begins. She carries the memory of Aegon's fires in her bones. And the Targaryens who ride them, they inherit that memory too. That long view of history is why the show's timeline is so carefully constructed. Every year, every decade, every name matters. We are standing at a point, roughly 170 years, before a girl named Daenerys Stormborn will hatch 3 dragons from stone eggs in the red waste of Essos. 170 years is a long time in human terms. Almost 8 generations could be born and die in that span. A great-grandson of Rhaenyra's could be dust, and his great-grandson after him, and still the dance's scars would not have healed. because the Dance of the Dragons is not just a civil war. It's the moment the Targaryen dynasty begins to burn itself out. The fires that consume Rhaenyra and a usurper, that kill dragons in dozens, that leave the Iron Throne stained with betrayal. Those are the same fires that, centuries later, will gutter low enough that a mad king can be deposed by a single Lannister blade. But let us be precise about that 170-year gap. House of the Dragon opens in the year 101 of Targaryen rule in Westeros. The Conquest itself happened 300 years before the War of the Five Kings. So subtract that 100 years of rule, and you get roughly 200 years before Game of Thrones begins. And Daenerys is born. Well, she is born toward the end of that timeline, during Robert's Rebellion, about 17 years before the main series starts. So the dance, which rages from roughly 129 to 131 after the Conquest, takes place about 170 years before her birth. That is the number that haunts the story. 170 years of decline, of warning ignored, of prophecies half remembered and misunderstood. Now, what did Rhaenyra and Daemon actually set in motion? At first glance, they lose. The Blacks are crushed. Rhaenyra is killed, fed to Aegon the Younger's dragon in the dragon pit, and a son later becomes king, but the damage is done. Daemon dies at the God's Eye, plunging his sword Dark Sister into Aemon's eye as they fall into the lake. The Greens also lose. Aegon the Usurper is poisoned, his line extinguished, but the cost is everything. Over half the dragon-riding families die. Most of the dragons themselves are killed. The few that survive, like the little ones that hatch later and the ones that hide in the wild, are sickly, stunted, and eventually they all die out in the reign of Aegon III, Rhaenyra's son, who grows up so traumatized by witnessing his mother's death and his own dragon's mutilation that he becomes known as Aegon the Dragonbane. The dragons disappear, and with them, the Targaryens lose the source of their power, their mystique, their ability to command fear and loyalty across the continents. That loss echoes down the centuries. Every subsequent Targaryen king or queen who tries to hold the realm together without dragons is operating at a disadvantage. The Blackfire rebellions, the first one erupting 60 years after the dance, are fought without dragons. The Faith militant rises again and is crushed only with swords, not fire. The dynasty becomes increasingly paranoid, inbreeding to keep the bloodline pure. But the bloodline becomes weaker, reducing madmen like Aerion Brightflame and eventually Aerys the Mad King. And at the same time, the memory of what dragons could do becomes legend, then myth. By the time Daenerys is born, the very existence of dragons is doubted in the streets of King's Landing. But here is the irony. The same prophecies that prompted the Targaryens to leave Valyria, that Daenys the Dreamer saw in her visions, survive through the centuries. Rhaenyra herself was obsessed with the Song of Ice and Fire, the prophecy that a Targaryen would unite the realms against the coming winter. She passed it down to her son, and through him it travelled to future kings. It may even have reached Daenerys in a fragmented form. When Daenerys finally hatches her dragons in the funeral pyre of Khal Drogo, she is not simply performing a miracle. She is reenacting an ancient Targaryen ritual, one that her ancestors had performed on Dragonstone, a ritual of blood and fire that the dance had nearly erased. She steps into the role that Rhaenyra was denied, the Mother of Dragons. And that title, Mother of Dragons, carries an ancestral weight that goes far beyond the simple fact of 3 hatchlings. Rhaenyra was mother to dragons too, in a sense. She raised them, loved them, rode Syrax into battle, but she was also mother to sons and daughters who would continue the line. Daenerys is the end of that line, the final Targaryen, the last dragon. The title Mother of Dragons was used first by the Targaryen queens of old, whispered in the Dragonmont, but it became Daenerys' official name because she revived what had been lost. She did not just birth dragons. She gave birth to hope that the dynasty could rise again. Yet the dance taught a terrible lesson. Dragons brought power, but they also brought destruction. Daenerys' final act in King's Landing, the burning of the city, is a direct echo of the carnage that Rhaenyra and Aemon unleashed upon the Riverlands, the burning of the Shepherd, the Dragon Pit riots. The madness that consumed the Targaryens during the dance is the same madness that consumed Daenerys. It is a cycle that began with greed and ambition, and it ended with ash. So when we watch Rhaenyra and Daemon, we are watching the beginning of the end. Their choices, their defiance, their cruelty, their love, their ambition, are the pebbles that start the avalanche. Every dragon that dies in the dance is one fewer egg left for Daenerys to find. Every broken bloodline is a step toward the sterile, desperate isolation that Daenerys endures in exile. Do you see how tightly woven this is? The fall of the dynasty and its eventual rebirth are not separate events. They are the same story told in two voices. The dance is the tragedy. Daenerys is the coda. She tries to rebuild what Rhaenyra lost, but she is also carrying the same flaws. The belief that only Targaryen blood can save the world, the willingness to use fire to solve problems, the inability to trust anyone outside the family. She repeats the dance without even knowing it, and that is the thematic connection that makes the 170-year gap so powerful. George R.R. Martin is not just writing a prequel, he is writing a mirror. House of the Dragon shows us the sins of the fathers, and Game of Thrones shows us the sins visited upon the children. Daemon's ruthlessness lives on in Daenerys' more volatile moments. Rhaenyra's stubbornness, her sense of entitlement, her feeling that the throne is hers by right. All of that echoes in the way Daenerys responds to the slights of the slave masters, the accusations of the Meereenese, the betrayal of Jon Snow. Even the names repeat. Rhaenyra had a dragon named Syrax. Daenerys names one of her dragons Rhaegal, after her brother Rhaegar, who himself was named after a dragon of old. History is not just repeating. It is rhyming with increasingly destructive consequences. 170 years is enough time for the lessons to be forgotten, but not enough time for the blood to cool. The wounds are still open when Daenerys is born. The realm still fears dragons, even as it is desperate for them. The Targaryens are still seen as either gods or monsters, never as people. That is the legacy of Rhaenyra and Daemon. They defined what it meant to be a Targaryen in the public imagination. Violent, incestuous, magnificent, and doomed. And Daenerys is forced to live inside that definition, whether she wants it or not. But the gap is also a promise, because as far as we know, Daenerys' death in the Red Keep ends the Targaryen line for good. There is no third act. The dynasty is gone, the dragons are gone, and yet, if the prophecies are true, if the Song of Ice and Fire was never just about a single Targaryen sitting on a throne, then maybe the story is not over. Maybe there is another gap, another rebirth, another future that we cannot see. But that is speculation for another night. Tonight, we sit with the weight of these 170 years. They are not empty. They are filled with the echo of dragon wings, the whispering of scheming lords, the slow decay of a house that once ruled the world. The dance of the dragons is the fracture that never fully heals. And when we finally meet Daenerys Targaryen in the Far East, when she steps into the fire and emerges with 3 squirming creatures clinging to her body, she is not just becoming the mother of dragons, she is the heir to a century and a half of loss. Now, as the first season of House of the Dragon draws the curtain on the Great Council and the crowning of Rhaenyra's half-brother, we have to ask, what happens in the century that follows? A century of Targaryen rule after the dance, a century of decline and desperation, a century of broken vows and poisoned chalices. That story will come next, when we examine the century of reign that bridges the dance and the final generations of the Dragon Lords. It is a story of how a dynasty becomes a ghost of itself, how the conquerors become the conquered, and it begins with a king who never wanted the throne, holding a dagger that his ancestor once used to try to change the world. That is where we go next. That 170-year gap we talked about isn't just a number on a page. It is the sound of a dynasty collapsing in slow motion. Every step Rhaenyra takes, Every whisper from the Green Council, it echoes, but that echo is only deafening because of where the sound originates. The show opens not in the infancy of the dragon's reign, but at its absolute zenith, 100 years. That is the precise distance into their rule. Aegon the Conqueror's fiery unification of the continent is a legend told to children, not a living memory. The faith militant uprisings are dust. The realm has known a generation of profound peace under the old king. Rhaenyra the Conciliator, the treasury overflows. The Red Keep is complete. The roads are paved with relative safety. And the dragons are everywhere. It is the largest concentration of dragon riders the continent has seen since the fall of Valyria itself. They are not just weapons of war, kept locked away and trotted out for coronations. They are pets. They are transportation. They are symbols of status worn on the wrist or kept in the yard. Vargar, the last living dragon of the actual Conquest, still roams the skies, a flying mountain of experience and raw fury. Caraxes, the bloodworm, is lean and battle-scarred, at the absolute peak of his terrifying prime. Meleys, the Red Queen, swift and terrible. Syrax, golden and sleek, the Queen's own pride. The mere act of listing those names in the same era is staggering. The Dragon Pit is not empty. It is a horde. The Targaryens are not just kings. They are a dynasty drunk on its own power, surrounded by the symbols of its own invincibility. But a god who bleeds is just a man, and the rot is there from the very first council scene in the very first episode. It isn't a dramatic dragon battle. It is a quiet conversation in a courtyard. It is a game of dice played in the shadows. Viserys I is not a tyrant. He is something far more dangerous to a system this rigid. He is a peacemaker who refuses to see the fractures forming beneath his feet. He is a king who favours personal harmony over structural preparation. The Hightowers whisper in the ear of his daughter's best friend. The Velaryons bristle at the slight to their bloodline and their naval pride. Daemon Targaryen waits in the wings, brilliant, violent, and deeply impatient, with a brother who refuses to wield the hammer he has been given. The succession is a ticking bomb, planted not by an enemy foreign power, but by the king's own heart. The fragility of a system built entirely on the health and will of a single man is the deep structural weakness of the entire monarchy. And when that man makes a choice based on love, based on grief, rather than iron duty, it creates a wound that cannot be healed by dragonfire, the rot, the blood purity. It is the incest. It is a closed system breeding genius, madness, and cruelty in equal measure. It is a family so intertwined they cannot tell where one person ends and another begins. And when a family that close falls out, the hate is purely familial, purely intimate, and purely devastating. Why start here, at the absolute height of the empire? Why not begin with Aegon landing at Blackwater Rush, full of heroic destiny? Why not begin with the construction of the Iron Throne? Because a tragedy needs a height from which to fall. A story of decline that begins in the middle of decline is just a slow slog. Starting at the peak gives the fall its terrible weight. The Dance of the Dragons is not a petty squabble over a crown. It is an extinction event, a world war fought by gods that the participants could not see coming because they were too close to the sun. They had every possible advantage. They had the largest army of nuclear weapons the world had ever known. They had a continent united under a single dynasty. They had a bloodline mythologized as something above men, and they squandered it all with a war fought over pride, blood, and a broken promise. By starting the narrative at the precise moment of maximum strength, the creators ensure the audience feels every inch of the fall. You understand exactly what is being lost. You feel the tragedy of watching a golden age burn itself alive. It is the story of a house so wildly powerful it could only be destroyed from within. The dragon cannot bite its own tail without bleeding out. To fully grasp the architecture of that tragedy, you have to stand back and look at the massive scale of the canvas. The distance between the war we are watching and the world we remember is vast. It completely reframes the narrative, which is the perfect lead into Chapter 28, the 200-year prequel. It is the final brushstroke on the timeline, the perspective that transforms a bloody civil war into a foundational myth for a broken world. It is the distance that gives the entire story its haunting, inescapable resonance. And so we arrive at the final anchor in our timeline. The year is roughly 120 before the Conquest, or about 200 years before the murder of Jon Arryn that sets the chaos of Game of Thrones in motion. This is the era of House of the Dragon, and it is here, in this crucible of fire and blood, that the seeds of the Targaryen decline are sown. We have spoken of the peak, 100 years into their reign, with dragons darkening every sky. But now we must talk about the fall. The Dance of the Dragons is not just a civil war between half-siblings. It is the single most catastrophic event in the history of the Targaryen dynasty. A self-inflicted wound that bleeds for centuries. Think of dragons. At the start of the dance, the Targaryens possess nearly 20 of them. The largest concentration of living fire since the Doom of Valyria. By the war's end, only a handful survive, and those that do are smaller, weaker, and less fearsome. The great dragons, Vhagar, who was alive during Aegon's conquest, Syrax, the Golden Queen, Caraxes, the Bloodworm, they all fall, one by one, in the sky above the God's Eye, in the Dragon Pit of King's Landing, in the Fields of the Reach. The loss is not just military, it is biological. The Targaryens had spent a century breeding their dragons, nurturing them, binding them to their bloodline. In a few short years of war, that entire ecosystem collapses. Why does this matter for the main series? Because without the dance, there would be no Daenerys. Or rather, she would be a very different kind of queen. The dragons that Daenerys hatches in the Red Oak West are not just any dragons. They are the last of their kind. The final echo of a power that was broken 200 years earlier. The dance is the moment when the Targaryens lose their monopoly on absolute power. Before the war, a Targaryen with a dragon is a god. After the war, they are just a family with a claim that becomes increasingly fragile as the years pass. Consider the immediate aftermath. The war leaves the realm devastated, the treasury empty, and the succession in chaos. King Aegon II is poisoned. Rhaenyra's son, Aegon III, becomes king, but he is a traumatized child, haunted by the memory of watching his mother being fed to a dragon. He is known as the Dragonbane, because he is terrified of the creatures that once defined his family's power. Under his reign, the last dragons die in the cradle, stunted and sickly, unable to breed. The Targaryen dynasty, once the masters of the sky, becomes grounded. This is the turning point. The loss of the dragons is not just a military blow, it is a psychological one. The Targaryens begin to lose their mystique. They are no longer the blood of the dragon in the same way. Their legitimacy, which rested so heavily on the fear and awe of their mounts, begins to erode. The Great Council of 101 AC, which had established the rules of succession, becomes a distant memory. The realm starts to see them as just another noble house, albeit one with a strange history and a penchant for fire. And this is where the 200-year prequel becomes essential. House of the Dragon shows us the Targaryens at their apex, but it also shows us the cracks forming. The dance is not a sudden event. It is the culmination of decades of tension, of poor decisions, of the rot that sets in when absolute power is held for too long. The show gives us the context for the madness of Aerys, the weakness of Viserys, the ambition of Daenerys, the seeds of the Mad King's paranoia in the paranoid reign of Viserys, the seeds of Daenerys' ruthlessness in Rhaenyra's determination to claim her birthright, no matter the cost. The 200-year gap is not empty. It is filled with the slow, grinding decline of a once great house. The Targaryens who follow are shadows of their ancestors. They have no dragons, and without dragons, they are just people with a crown. The wars that follow, the Blackfyre rebellions, the defiance of Duskendale, the tragedy of Summerhall, all of these are echoes of the dance, aftershocks of the seismic event that broke the Targaryen spirit. And so, when we finally arrive at the beginning of Game of Thrones, the Targaryens are already a dying star. Daenerys is born on Dragonstone, a storm-born child in a world without dragons. A family is scattered, a father mad, a brother desperate. The throne she seeks is not just a seat of power, it is a symbol of a lost world, a world where her ancestors could command the sky itself. Her journey to reclaim that throne is not just a political struggle, it is a quest to restore the Targaryen legacy, to bring back the fire that was extinguished 2 centuries earlier, and that is the deep lore connection. The Dance of the Dragons is not just a prequel. It is the origin story of the Targaryen decline. It is the moment when the family's greatest strength becomes its greatest weakness. It is the war that teaches the realm that dragons can die, that Targaryens are not gods, and that the Iron Throne is not unassailable. Every subsequent tragedy, every betrayal, every war can be traced back to this single conflict. So when you watch House of the Dragon, remember that you are not just watching a story about a family feud. You are watching the beginning of the end. You are watching the moment when the Targaryen dynasty begins its long, slow fall from grace. And 200 years later, when Daenerys Targaryen stands in the ashes of King's Landing, she is not just a conqueror. She is the last echo of a fire that burned too brightly, too fiercely, and too briefly. She is the final desperate attempt to reclaim a glory that was lost before she was even born. This is the tragedy of the Targaryens. They were never meant to be ordinary. They were meant to be dragons. But dragons, like empires, are not eternal. They burn bright and then they burn out. And the Dance of the Dragons is the moment when the fire began to dim. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.